Chapter 223. Accompanied by a loud neigh, the sky that was originally dark and without a trace of light suddenly cleared up. A beautiful white horse, accompanied by a huge sun, descended from the sky. "Nay, my old enemy, the white horse of the sun." Athena frowned as she looked at the fireball that was comparable to a real sun with a sour expression. Wuming held Yggdrasil with one arm raised high and the other arm holding the giant Yggdrasil, then looked at Athena. "So, can you withstand my double incarnation of the sun, Athena?" As he spoke, Wuming's raised hand abruptly fell down. "Nay." The white steed charged down without any fancy decorations. Athena looked at Wuming, who was standing motionless in the distance. She gave up on attacking and condensed her mana into a shield. "The Aegis shield, huh?" Wuming read out the name of the shield. Legend has it that the Aegis shield was made by Hephaestus, the god of fire in Greek mythology. One was held by Zeus, and the other was held by Athena. The one held by Zeus was called Aegis. The Aegis shield had the ability to generate storms. When it was placed in the sky would become dark, and when it was picked up, the sky would become clear again. It was said that this shield had a super high level of defense that even Zeus' powerful weapon couldn't damage. The Aegis shield held by Athena was called Aegis because the shield was inlaid with Medusa's head. Legend has it that Perseus, with the help of Athena and Hermes, killed Medusa. After that, Perseus cut off Medusa's head. Although Medusa was dead, the power of petrification in her eye of petrification did not disappear. After knowing that, Perseus offered Medusa's head to Athena, and then Athena inlaid Medusa's head on her shield. That was the origin of Aegis' shield. Athena's shield was different from Zeus' shield. Athena's shield only had the defense of Zeus' shield, but it did not have the ability to summon storms. However, because it was embedded with the Medusa's head, when the Medusa's head opened its eyes, it became a magic shield that would petrify anyone it faced. Meanwhile, all the weapons and items that the god of disobedience used were god relics that the god of disobedience had imitated. To put it simply, they were not real weapons, armor, and items that were mentioned in myths. Instead, they were made of magic, which was very similar to a servant. Even so, it was still a clone of the god of disobedience's artifact, so it shouldn't be underestimated. After all, it still had some of the original artifact's abilities. Just a little sun fall. Athena held the Aegis shield in both hands and welcomed the arrival of the incarnation of the sun. The eye of Medusa on the Aegis shield opened, and the gray light shone on the white horse. However, the white horse was still descending at its original speed. The incarnation of the sun was a new authority after the fusion of Wales Lana's white horse and Mecher's god king's divinity. Not only was it more powerful than the previous white horse, but it was also strengthened by authority and double incarnation. This authority could be said to be one of Wuming's trump cards. In order to deal with the immortal mother goddess, Wuming directly activated this incarnation. After all, it was Wuming's first time using this incarnation, so he might not be able to control it well. The main reason was that basically no one could force Wuming to use this trump card, so Wuming had never used it before. Now, in order to defeat Athena, Wuming chose to activate this incarnation. Fortunately, Athena chose to fight in the Pacific Ocean, so there was no need to worry about the ordinary people around her being affected. This was also one of the reasons why Wuming came without much preparation. Rumble. The white horse crashed into Athena, who was holding the Aegis shield, and the violent explosion directly covered the entire invisible island. At this moment, the entire invisible island was completely destroyed. Wuming floated in the sky, looking at the real sea of fire below. After all, the flames brought by the incarnation of the sun were inextinguishable, and would only be extinguished when Wuming's incarnation was extinguished. The sea was violently fluctuating because of the sun summoned by Wuming, and a large amount of white fog was constantly rising. After that, Wuming carefully searched. At this moment, Wuming suddenly discovered a petite, lowly floating quietly above the sea of fire. The surrounding flames were scorching her, causing her to frown the entire time. In the competition between the sun and Mother Earth, Wu Ming's son won. In fact, Wu Ming didn't have any suspense about it. He couldn't imagine how powerful Wu Ming's incarnation could be. Perhaps the adult Wu Ming could handle it. After all, the growth of the root dragon's strength was not by leaps and bounds, but by a qualitative change. Of course, he would have to wait until he reached adulthood. Wu Ming shook his head, flew down, and hugged the unconscious and naked Athena, who was still floating on the sea. After that, he fished out the Gorgon stone that was about to sink to the bottom of the sea. After all, the Gorgon stone that had been unsealed could not be simply left around. It was a high-level god relic that represented the divinity of the mother goddess, and it might even attract disobedient gods. Looking at the naked Athena, Wu Ming looked away awkwardly. Wu Ming took out a piece of white cloth from the golden ripples of Dragonist and put it on Athena. Because Athena had the Aegis shield, and Wu Ming deliberately reduced the lethality of the sun after breaking Athena's shield, Athena didn't die directly. However, even if she died, Athena still had the authority to resurrect. In fact, if Athena didn't take Wu Ming's son head-on, she wouldn't have failed here. After all, they were enemies, so naturally, she couldn't give in. In addition, Wu Ming did not continue to attack, so Athena chose to take it head-on. The goddess of wisdom should have chosen not to fight in the face of the situation just now. But in the end, she still lost to her own willfulness. Looking at the young Athena in his arms, Wu Ming smiled helplessly and shook his head. Because the sun's incarnation directly melted the invisible island, and they were at sea, Wu Ming didn't need to do any post-battle maintenance. With a simple wave of his hand, Wu Ming dispelled the undying flame and flew away with Athena, who was only draped in a white cloth. The sea level was still in a state of high temperature, constantly fluctuating. Chapter 2:24. Wu Ming returned to the outside of the villa. As soon as he landed, Wu Ming noticed several cold gazes. When he turned around, Erica, Liliana, Qingxiu, Courtyard Huina, Wanli Guyoli, and Alice were all looking at Wu Ming. However, Erica and Alice's gazes were filled with joy. Qingxiu Courtyard Huina's gaze was somewhat worried, and Wanli Guyoli and Liliana's gazes were filled with anger. I heard that Lord Wu Ming returned the Gorgon stone to Lady Athena. Wanli Guyoli's face was gloomy. He also very kindly helped Lady Athena recover her strength. Liliana frowned, and Lord Wu Ming and Lady Athena made a bet. Wanli Guyoli continued with a gloomy face. And it's a bet where the loser will be the winner's subordinate god. Liliana was still frowning. Lord Wu Ming, do you know that this is an extremely dangerous bet? Looking up, Wanli Guyoli looked at Wu Ming. It's fine if it's Erica, but you didn't even bring me your knight. Liliana looked at Wu Ming with dissatisfaction. Wanli Guyoli and Liliana stared at Wu Ming. However, as if he was already used to it, Wu Ming walked straight to the villa. Then, Wu Ming said, "Let's go in first. It's cold outside." Everyone sat on the sofa. Then, Wu Ming arranged for Athena to stay in an empty room and walked out. Sitting on the sofa, Wu Ming looked at the girls. "By the way, how did you know?" Wu Ming glanced at Erica, wondering if she was the one who revealed the news. Erica smiled slyly. It just spread around the world that the Eastern Hemisphere entered a polar day in a few minutes, Wanli Guyoli said. "We quickly gathered because we were worried that something might happen, but Erica claimed that it was your doing," Huina of the Blue Autumn Yard said. "Come to think of it, Welslana has the power to summon the sun. Plus, you have disappeared. No matter how you look at it, it has something to do with you." Alice smiled. "I can't hide it anymore. After all, it's already so obvious." Erica pretended to wave her hand helplessly. Only then did Wu Ming realize that he had indeed gone a little overboard just now. Wu Ming was probably affected by the Godslayer's constitution. He would sometimes forget some things when he was fighting. At that time, Wu Ming only wanted to get rid of Athena in one breath, so he released the incarnation of the sun. Now the official history committee is busy trying to eliminate the panic of the people. And as a knight, I can't even serve my master when he's fighting. What a failure, Liliana said with some regret. Don't force yourself, Lily. The battle between Wuming and Athena, who has recovered the true form of Mother Earth, isn't something we can participate in. For example, if we were present when Wuming summoned the sun just now, we would definitely drag Wuming down. Also, you have to have confidence in your master, Lily, Alice said leisurely. This was also why Erica neither objected to Wuming going to the invisible island alone, nor did she blame Wuming for challenging Athena without permission. Liliana nodded slightly. Of course, Liliana was aware of this. However, her pride as a knight wouldn't allow her to watch her master go to the battlefield alone. Let's not talk about this for now. That was Lady Athena just now, right? Is it really okay for Lord Wuming to bring Lady Athena back? That's Lady Athena of Mother Earth. Wanli Guyuli looked at Wuming with some disappointment and scolded him fiercely. Don't worry, Yuli. The gods naturally abide by the rules. Since Athena was defeated by me, she definitely won't mess around, Wuming explained. Wuming thought of something and then said with a smile, and your attitude now is very impolite. Wanli Guyuli was shocked and quickly apologized. Please punish only me, Your Majesty. Don't implicate others. Looking at Wanli Guyuli, who instantly sat down, Wuming laughed. Ha ha. Wanli Guyuli looked at Wuming in confusion. Erica couldn't stand it anymore and helped Wanli Guyuli up. Get up, Yuli. Wuming is joking with you. Really, after being together for so long, you still don't understand his character. Well, Lord Wuming sometimes has a bad taste. Alice nodded and agreed. Don't you think about yourself first when talking about others' bad taste, Alice? Wuming stopped laughing and looked at Alice with a, you still have the nerve to talk about others look. Thank you for the compliment, Lord Wuming. Alice looked into Wuming's eyes and nodded with a smile. Well, everyone go to sleep. Although a lot of things have happened just now, it's over. Wuming clapped his hands and said. All the girls nodded and then returned to their rooms. It was just a pity that the official history committee was still cleaning up the mess caused by Wuming. After all, it was caused by their new king. Even if they didn't sleep, they had to deal with it. Then, Wuming came to Athena's room. You should be awake, Athena. Wuming sat on Athena's bed and looked at the sleeping lowly in front of him. The petite Athena's eyes flew open, and she sat up. I was afraid that I would disturb you flirting with your girls, so I continued to pretend to be asleep. Hearing this voice and looking at the unconscious Athena, Wuming smiled and touched Athena's head. Then I must thank you, my subordinate god. Hey, Athena was quite unhappy, but because of the bet, she didn't resist Wuming's touch. Have you really decided to release the last king? Athena's snake eyes stared straight at Wuming. Wuming nodded solemnly. Now, you should know that I'm a god from another world. Athena nodded. I have my own purpose in coming to this world. Sir, your purpose has basically been achieved. Wuming's noble phantasm, the 12 incarnations, could be said to be extremely powerful. With the dependent incarnation, Wuming's second authority, Ling Zhuzi, was basically useless. Ling Zhuzi, throw out the spirit orb obtained from killing Neza, the god of steel. The spirit orb will transform into Neza and provide combat power for the tamed demon. Since I am indebted here and promised Alice to solve the problem of the last king, I will definitely solve it. Even if you die? Athena asked. Even if I die, I will not die. Wuming answered firmly. You really are a man with a divine artifact. Athena then lay down. I'm a little tired. As my main god, shouldn't you hug me to sleep? Athena looked straight at Wuming. Really, so many requests. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that I was your subordinate god. However, Wuming lay down obediently and hugged Athena. Athena leaned into Wuming's arms and rubbed against him. Just be a pillow. With this thought, Wuming and Athena fell asleep together. Chapter 225. At night, somewhere in Japan, Guinevere sat in the arms of Lancelot, who was riding a white horse. He held the arrowhead disc and closed his eyes. Faint magic particles floated around Guinevere. It could be seen that Guinevere was performing a magic trick. As if he had found something, Guinevere opened his eyes. However, the magical thing was that there was a universe in Guinevere's eyes. It was a planet in the universe, Earth. In Earth's orbit, right above Japan, a platform full of magic floated and rotated with Earth. Found it. Guinevere's voice was a little excited. It seems that even if you're demoted to a god ancestor, your astral vision is still powerful, Lancelot commented. Guinevere shook his head excitedly. If it weren't for the fight between Lord Wooming and Lord Athena, the strongest steel wouldn't have awakened, and I wouldn't have been able to find the last king. After all, this was also one of Wooming's ideas. In Japan, the reason why Susanoo and a group of people from the hidden world lured the great sage, heaven's equal here, was to eliminate the dragon and destroy the snake. This was to prevent the dragon and snake attributes from attracting the last king and breaking the seal of the last king. If it were 200 or 300 years ago, they wouldn't have to be so careful. However, they couldn't do it now. As long as there was another demon king, God Slayer, on the ground, the seal of the last king would weaken. Now that there were 7 God Slayers, the seal of the last king could be said to be very loose. If it weren't for the fact that Wooming became a God Slayer as the god of disobedience, the last king would have awakened long ago. As Wooming said before, if there was another God Slayer now, the last king would definitely awaken. What Wooming, Guinevere, and Lancelot had discussed in the grove was Wooming's plan. They wanted to use the dragon and snake attributes to stimulate the last king's awakening and make him appear directly. However, the result was a failure. Wooming had long thought of this element of the dragon-snake attribute stimulation, so he had sent Zaisha to America. However, plans could not keep up with changes. The battle between Wooming and Athena could also be considered as the stimulation of the dragon-snake attribute. After all, Athena was Mother Earth, and Wooming had the dual nature of steel and serpent. Especially during the battle with Athena, Wooming fully released the dragon-serpent attribute that he sealed after killing Neza. Wooming didn't think that 2 dragon serpents' aura and 1 Godslayer's aura couldn't awaken the last king. But in the end, the king did not appear. This was also the reason why Wooming used his trump card, the sun, right after the battle with Athena. He wanted to preserve his strength to deal with the last king, but the last king did not show up. As a last resort, Wooming contacted Guinevere and asked him to use spirit vision to find the place where the last king was sealed. Liliana, Wanli Yuri, and Alice, whose ancestors were god ancestors, all had extremely powerful spirit vision. Wooming didn't believe that Guinevere, a god ancestor who had fallen from Mother Earth, wouldn't have spirit vision. As a result, as Wooming expected, Guinevere really found the location of the last king. Although it's inappropriate to say this now, I still want to ask, have you really decided, my beloved daughter? Lancelot said in a puzzled tone. Guinevere fell into silence. Guinevere understood what Lancelot meant. Lancelot was asking if he was prepared for the master he served and his lover to kill each other. Whether it was the relationship between the hero and the demon king, the relationship between the strongest steel and the legendary dragon, or the relationship between different beliefs, Wooming and the last king were destined to not coexist peacefully. They must kill each other. This was something that Guinevere knew. Guinevere's eyes were full of confusion. Lancelot fell silent as well. There's an old Chinese saying that I think will suit you if I change it a little. Since ancient times, it's hard to have both loyalty and love. Perhaps it could be used on you now. Loyalty freed the last king and let him fight with the one he loved. There was a high possibility that the one he loved would be killed. Love gave up on freeing the last king and let the one he loved live in the world. After a long silence, Guinevere spoke. Then, if I choose love, uncle, will you kill me? Guinevere asked a question that sounded like a big joke. Lancelot was a shadow of God who protected Guinevere, the god ancestor. Guinevere actually asked his own guardian if he would kill him. Was this not a big joke? However, Lancelot's answer was, I will kill thee. Lancelot said calmly, I will kill thee who is not loyal to my master. Even if you are my beloved daughter, I will still kill thee. However, Guinevere accepted it calmly as if he already knew the answer. Then, uncle, can you make a bet with Guinevere? Guinevere asked. Lancelot fell silent for a moment, then nodded his head that was wrapped in armor. Guinevere, who felt Lancelot's nod, smiled and continued. If the last king is defeated by the Villo, then you and I will pledge allegiance to the Villo and become the Villo's wife and knight. What do you think? To be honest, Lancelot was shaken. Having once followed Varro in this world, she knew that she once had the thought of how great would it be if this person was my lord, but her loyalty to him did not waver. However, 1,000 years of longing could destroy a person, but it could also shake the heart of a disobedient god. I can't make the decision. I must ask my master. Lancelot's answer was neither yes nor no. However, Guinevere smiled. Of course, we have to ask that lord first. Then, Guinevere began to unseal the last king. Guinevere left Lancelot's embrace, dismounted from his horse, and came to the ground. Then, he took out a golden cup from nowhere. This was the holy grail of King Arthur that the Black Prince, one of the Godslayers, and many other magicians were after. Guinevere placed the holy grail in front of him and knelt down with the arrowhead disc in his hand. Lancelot came to the side to protect Guinevere as well as to be on guard. Guinevere, the holy grail, and the arrowhead disc began to glow. The ritual to summon the last king had begun. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning shot towards Guinevere at a speed that shocked Lancelot. Uncle! Guinevere was shocked and shouted Lancelot's name. Just as the lightning was about to reach Guinevere, a spear stabbed at it. Chapter 226. The tip of the spear pierced the lightning. If it did not stop moving forward, the lightning would definitely be pierced by the tip of the spear. In an instant, the lightning made a sharp turn and deviated from Guinevere. Guinevere, who was somewhat worried, was relieved. Then, the lightning stopped not far from Guinevere and turned into a human figure. The figure was wearing a luxurious suit, a bow tie, and leather shoes. His black hair was parted in half, and it set off his handsome face. Lord Yarek, you are really haunting me. Although Guinevere used honorifics, there was a trace of anger in his tone. That's right, the noble man standing in front of Guinevere and Lancelot was the British godslayer, Alexander Gerstein. His nickname was Black Prince Yarek, who was even more famous than himself. It's a pity. This is the best chance I've had in the past. I'm afraid I won't have another chance in the future. Yarek, who did not get what he wanted, was not upset. Instead, he calmly analyzed the situation. It's really hard on you, Lancelot. You have to protect such a useless guy, Yarek mocked. However, Lancelot did not accept Yarek's mockery. He was already holding a spear, fully armed, and staring at Yarek. The atmosphere began to become tense. As old rivals who had been fighting for some time, Guinevere and Lancelot naturally knew what each other wanted. That was the Holy Grail placed in front of Guinevere, which had magic power comparable to that of multiple godslayers. However, Guinevere would not hand over the Holy Grail no matter what. This was because the Holy Grail was an essential and important prop for the last king. The reason why Guinevere created the Holy Grail to store magic power was to replenish the magic power of the last king, who had exhausted his magic power because of his deep sleep. Just from this point alone, one could see the power of the last king. The amount of magic power required was comparable to the magic power of multiple godslayers combined. Except for Wuming, among the 6 godslayers, whether it was the oldest, Woban, or the youngest, Salvatore, they had never worried about the lack of magic power. No matter what kind of battle it was, no matter how exhausting it was, none of the 6 godslayers except Wuming had ever said that they did not have enough mana. Based on this point alone, the last king's mana was comparable to the mana of multiple godslayers combined. This showed how powerful the last king was. The reason why Wuming was excluded was because, like the last king, Wuming had more magic power than the last king. After all, it was a root dragon. How could it lack mana? Of course, it could not be said that Wuming's magic power was infinite. It was just that under the condition of a rather large base, the addition of the condition that his magic power recovery speed was not slow, which led to the continuous release of magic power. It would take months or years for Wooming to recover his magic power, and that was under the premise that Wooming did not automatically recover his magic power. Coupled with Wooming's constant meditation over the years, the upper limit of his demonic power had also broken through. This was also why Wooming dared to compete with the last king. Now, this country is the territory of that lord. Aren't you afraid of offending that lord? Guinevere warned Yerek. You're talking about Villo the Ransword, the guy who calls himself Wooming. He became a god-slayer as a disobedient. Even if he is not as warlike and brutal as other people of his race, I can't agree with him. After all, he is a disobedient god with the authority of other disobedient gods. Yerek calmly stated his evaluation of Wooming. Guinevere frowned. After all, Yerek was the person he admired, so he naturally could not bear to hear others talk about him. Lancelot was also a little upset. He clenched his spear with one hand and pointed it at Yerek. If you still want to talk nonsense here, you'd better leave. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself and kill you as the god of disobedience. After all, Lancelot was Guinevere's shadow of God. He could not leave Guinevere's vicinity. The only way was to appear as the god of disobedience. This would not only increase Lancelot's power, but also free him from the restriction of protecting Guinevere. This was why Lancelot said that if Guinevere chose to betray him, he would kill her. Looking at the furious Lancelot, Yerek smiled. Although that person is also King Arthur, you and the god ancestor behind you are not Guinevere and Lancelot. Why are you so agitated? Yerek mocked. A brilliant sword light shot toward Yerek. Yerek immediately dodged. Lancelot maintained his spear posture and looked at Yerek. I'll ask you again. Are you leaving or not? What if I insist on staying? Then I'll have to appear as the god of disobedience and kill you. Lancelot and Yerek stared at each other while Guinevere resumed the ritual of summoning the last king. We pray for the rebirth of the sword. Cut through the darkness of the apocalypse and kill the demon king of the apocalypse. The arrowhead disc in Guinevere's arms and the holy grail in front of him began to glow. The noble sword of swords, the blade of blades, the steel of steel. The arrowhead disc and the holy grail began to float into the sky at a speed that made Yerek frown. They turned into a meteor and flew into the universe. Thou art the blade that annihilates the demon king. Thou art the holy light that saves the world. Slay all Rakshasas. Be the call of our allies. Return to the world. After the chanting, the arrowhead disc and the holy grail arrived on a platform in the universe. There was a sword in the center of the platform. If Wooming was here, he would definitely recognize it. It was a knight's greatsword that was almost identical to Artoria's, King Arthur's, Excalibur in the lake, were even exactly the same. However, this holy sword looked extremely rusty, as if it could break at any moment. This was the sword of the legendary hero, the sword of salvation that killed the demon king. The arrowhead disc and the holy grail floated above the sword of salvation. In an instant, the arrowhead disc and the holy grail melted and turned into liquid that flowed into the sword of salvation. Beep, beep, beep. The sword of salvation began to emit white lightning. Beep, 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 beep. The lightning became more and more intense until it spread to the entire platform. Then, the platform exploded. Boom! Without the restriction of the platform, the sword of salvation began to fly downward. In the blink of an eye, the sword of salvation reached Earth and Guinevere's side. Boom! The landing of the sword of salvation stirred up a lot of dust. Guinevere, Lancelot, and Yerek looked at the dust with serious expressions. Gradually, the dust dissipated. A slightly tired young man walked out with the divine blade of salvation in his hand. Chapter 2:27. Rather than calling him a young man, it would be better to call him a severely exhausted youth. In the end, I still came to the surface. The last king spoke with a weary tone. Master, my lord. Guinevere knelt on one knee, and Lancelot also dismounted and knelt on the ground, lowering his head. Both of them were quite excited. Finally, The long-cherished wish they had been pursuing for thousands of years finally came true. The last king glanced at Guinevere and Lancelot. It turned out to be you. However, there was a hint of weariness in his eyes, but he instantly recovered his tiredness. Then the last king said to himself, "Since I have come to the ground, I have to kill the Godslayers as soon as possible. Otherwise, the end will come." Then the last king looked at the Black Prince Yerek with his tired eyes. In an instant, his tired eyes became extremely sharp. The last king raised the sword of salvation and slashed it gently, and a huge and fast lightning slashed toward Yerek. Not good. Yerek was shocked and hurriedly activated his lightning spark. That was the authority Yerek often used, and it could be said to be his representative authority. This authority came from the fallen angel, Ramir, who controlled lightning and illusions. It allowed Yerek to enter the world of speed that no one could reach. It was a high-speed movement technique entwined with lightning, which allowed Yerek to obtain the agility of a cat. Whoosh! The lightning released by the last king struck Yerek, who had transformed into lightning. Yerek used the lightning to flee into the distance. However, for some reason, the last king didn't chase after Yerek. "Let's go." After saying that, the last king stepped away, walked past Guinevere and Lancelot, and left. Guinevere and Lancelot waited for the last king to pass before standing up and following him. Not long after the three of them left, the ground nearby began to change. The surrounding flowers and trees began to wither rapidly, and the ground began to dry up as if it lost its life. In the distance, lightning fell on the ground and turned into a figure. Cough! Cough! Yerek half knelt on the ground with one hand covering his chest and the other covering the corner of his mouth. Blood flowed from his hand. The last king, huh? What a terrifying fellow. That's right, the last king had injured Yerek, who had entered the seraphic speed state, with just a casual strike. Although Yerek, who had entered seraphic speed, would lose his physical defense as a godslayer, the last king was able to injure Yerek with a casual blow. This was enough to show how extraordinary the last king was. Also, that blow just grazed me. It's unbelievable. If it had hit me directly, I might have been dead, Yerek analyzed calmly. Then, it turned into a bolt of lightning and left. Wuming's villa. Wuming and Athena, who were sleeping soundly, immediately woke up. "Do you feel it? The aura of steel." Athena sat up and looked at Wuming. It seems that the last king has descended. No, it should be that Guinevere has successfully awakened him, Wuming said with certainty. "Is this your plan as well?" Athena asked. "Of course not. This is Guinevere's backup plan." Wuming got off the bed and walked to the window. He looked at the unnatural situation outside and continued. "The last king will unlock his seal when the number of demon kings on the ground increases. Until now, the seal of the last king has begun to move. But because I'm not a pure godslayer, the last king has not completely awakened yet." Athena followed and looked outside with Wuming. "Originally, I wanted to use the draconic snake attribute to stimulate the last king to appear, so I sent my subordinates to capture the draconic snakes. But because there were already draconic snakes, so you fought with me, right?" Athena's snake eyes looked at Wuming. As expected of the goddess of wisdom, "You understand immediately." Wuming smiled awkwardly. After all, Wuming was using Athena. "I don't blame you. I admire the fact that you can use wisdom to achieve your goal." Athena smiled slyly after seeing Wuming's embarrassment. Wuming heaved a sigh of relief. So Athena was just teasing him. Shaking his head, Wuming left the window and walked to the door. Now that the last king has appeared, the chaos outside must be caused by the last king. After all, I am the mastermind, so I have to take the responsibility of defeating him. Wuming was right. The last king was also a god of disobedience. As a god of disobedience, he must have the ability to cause catastrophic changes to his surroundings. As mentioned before, if the god of war descended, the war would occur unnaturally. If the god of sea descended, the sea level would rise unnaturally. If the god of sun descended, the sun would become extraordinarily hot. As for what the last king would cause, Wuming didn't know. But Wu Ming believed that the disaster caused by the last king would not be weaker than the other gods of disobedience. Wu Ming believed that the disaster caused by the last king would be 100 times stronger than the other gods of disobedience. Stay here and rest. I have placed the Gorgon stone on the table. Remember not to run around. Gotcha! As the door closed, Athena was the only one left in the room. Athena silently walked to the table where the Gorgon stone was placed. Then, the corners of her mouth curled up. Wu Ming walked out of the room and came to the hall. He saw the fully armed girls, including Alice, who was mentally exhausted from using spirit vision. After Wu Ming arrived, all the girls' eyes were focused on Wu Ming. Did everyone realize? Wu Ming asked. The girls nodded in agreement. It's the last king, right? Alice said. Wu Ming nodded. Most likely. Then Alice spoke. Just now, the Sage Council of Greenwich sent me a message. Just now, almost all the magic associations in the world sent a message to the Sage Council of Greenwich. The spirit veins under their jurisdiction have been disrupted to varying degrees. Mr. Gonzai just called me and said that the spirit veins in Japan have been completely disrupted, so he needs to ask Yuri and Huina for help. Erica said, Master Wu Ming, I have to hurry back to the United Kingdom. I need to go back and hold a ceremony to stabilize the spirit veins, Alice said. Then I'll ask Erica to send you off, Wu Ming said. No need, Master Wu Ming. I'm afraid Erica and Miss Liliana have to rush back to Italy too, Alice said with a smile. Wu Ming looked at Erica and Liliana. Because the two of us are rare prodigies in the Italian Magic Association, my uncle asked me to go back to Italy to stabilize the spirit veins. Grandpa told me the same. He also said that the king would definitely allow it. Liliana blushed. After all, as a knight, she could only stay in the rear and let her master go to the battlefield alone in the face of a great enemy. Liliana couldn't help but feel a little guilty. It's okay. You can go back too. However, I'll give you some protection first. Alice blushed when she heard Wu Ming's words. It's a normal protection. Wu Ming glanced at Alice and said with a smile. Then, Wu Ming touched the girls' foreheads to give them the protection of super magic power. In this way, you can squander it however you want, Wu Ming said. Then, the girls left the villa. Then, a guest came to the villa. Chapter 228. In the hall, Wu Ming sat casually on the sofa and quietly waited for the guest in front of him to speak. The guest seemed to want Wu Ming to speak first, so he didn't speak. Wu Ming yawned casually and continued to be silent. As if admitting defeat, the guest spoke. The disobedient king. You know about the arrival of the last king, right? Yerek couldn't bear the silence and spoke first. Since the other party had spoken, Wu Ming didn't hide it. I know, or rather, I planned the arrival of the last king. In an instant, Yerek's look at Wu Ming changed. From a guy he could barely work with to a complete enemy. Wu Ming saw the look in Yerek's eyes, or rather, from the beginning. Wu Ming saw that Yerek was rejecting him, so Wu Ming mocked Yerek. In any case, the final king will definitely descend. I merely brought forward the time of his descent. Listening to Wu Ming's nonchalant speech, Yerek frowned. Do you know how severe the disaster caused by the last king is? You dare to summon the last king to the ground ahead of time. Although Yerek wasn't a good person, he couldn't watch the world suffer, and this was also due to Yerek's good upbringing. Of course I know, and the reason I let him descend is to defeat the last king, to defeat him completely. Wu Ming meant that he wanted to completely eliminate the last king to prevent him from coming again in the future. After all, Yerek had read in the records that the last king came more than once, and every time he came, he would disappear after killing all the demon kings, and the disaster on the earth would stop. Wu Ming's idea was correct, but do you really have the ability to completely eliminate the last king, Villotharanst? Yerek called out Wu Ming's disobedient name. Don't think that you can kill the last king just because you're a god. Wu Ming scoffed at Yerek's mockery. You came to find me after meeting the last king, right? Wu Ming asked. Wu Ming had received news from Guinevere that the Black Prince Yerek had witnessed the resurrection of the last king and had escaped after being injured by the last king. Yerek was defeated by the last king, so he came back to Wuming. This was Wuming's guess. So what? Yerek frowned. Then let me give you a word of advice. Don't judge others based on your own standards. What he meant was, you are weak, but don't think of others as weak. I carried out this series of plans in order to defeat the last king. Since the other side was so confident, Yerek didn't say anything else. Then, resisting the urge to leave, Yerek spoke again. Since that's the case, you must know about the Ancient Covenant. The Ancient Covenant was the special authority that only a small number of steel had, as Sun Wukong, the great sage equal to heaven, had said. Wuming nodded. The last king must have the authority of the Ancient Covenant. I thought of a way to weaken his power. When Yerek said this, Wuming also thought of something. That was, since the Ancient Covenant is the power to multiply the number of Godslayers, then, if there's only one Godslayer left, then the Ancient Covenant will be useless. Engage in civil war to reduce the number of Godslayers. This was the idea that Yerek and Wuming came up with. Since you are so confident in yourself, do you want to try this method? Yerek looked at Wuming cautiously. In response, Wuming smiled. I have to say, this method is indeed very effective. However, I don't think the last king's strength lies in the Ancient Covenant. The last king had the Ancient Covenant to increase his power, but Wuming didn't believe that Sun Wukong, who wasn't the last king, would have the Ancient Covenant. The last king was called the last king because he had the power to resist the last king. So, I reject your suggestion. Wuming looked into Yerek's eyes and said firmly, you could try to communicate with the other Godslayers and engage in civil war among the demon kings. I accept that you can attack me at any time, but Wuming sat up straight and looked at Yerek. Do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the last king will be defeated by me. Then, Wuming leaned on the sofa and closed his eyes. Yerek narrowed his eyes, thinking about something. Then, he turned into a lightning bolt and left Wuming's mansion. Wuming, who was sitting on the sofa with his eyes closed, said without turning his head, Sebastian. Yes. The old man, named Sebastian, appeared behind Wuming. Did Satya successfully escape from John's pursuit? Wuming asked. Yes, Wuming-sama. With my help, Satya has escaped from the pursuit of the American Godslayer John Pluto Smith and came to Japan. At this moment, Satya is guarding Angela in the cave behind the mansion. After listening to Sebastian's words, Wuming felt a little helpless. In fact, Wuming asked Satya to capture Angela a long time ago. After all, the only snake that had nothing to do with him was the American god, Angela. Wuming's original intention was to use Angela as a primer to stimulate the appearance of the last king, but he didn't expect that America's Godslayer, John Pluto Smith, would be so difficult to deal with that Zaisha couldn't safely bring Angela to Japan. In the end, Wuming chose to use himself and Athena as a catalyst. Although the effect wasn't good, the final result was good, and the last king was revived. Now, Angela was useless, and Wuming wasn't someone who would kill easily, but he couldn't just let Angela go. After all, that guy had done a lot of bad things. Keep him as a pet. Incidentally, Angela's true form was a 50-meter-long demonic snake, Leviathan, the snake god. Let Satya bring Angela here. We don't need to watch her for the time being. Yes, I'll contact Satya. Sebastian stepped aside and began to contact Satya. After about a few seconds, a black and red portal appeared in front of Wuming. Zaisha walked out gracefully with a submissive little lowly following behind her. If he was not mistaken, this should be Angela. Long time no see, Lord Wuming. I missed you. Satya was infatuated with him as soon as she arrived. However, Wuming didn't pay attention to Satya, but to the lowly Angela behind her. The reason why Wuming paid attention to Angela was because she was naked. That's right, there were only a few bandages wrapped around her petite body, which was even more seductive than being completely naked. Ahem, why don't you find her some clothes, Satya? Wuming turned his head slightly and asked, This has nothing to do with me, Lord Wuming. She was the one who insisted on not wearing clothes. I don't want Lord Wuming's noble eyes to look at other women's bodies. Satya bit a handkerchief that she took out from somewhere with an unwilling expression. After all, Wuming had told her not to hurt Angela, so Satya couldn't do anything to her and could only threaten her verbally. Then, Wuming took out a white robe from the golden ripples and threw it to Angela. Put it on. To Satya's surprise, Angela was actually obedient and obediently put on the white robe. After all, Angela was particularly stubborn when it came to wearing clothes. Even if Angela was afraid of Satya, she wouldn't give in on wearing clothes. At this time, as if she saw Satya's doubts, Angela spoke, because Sama is both steel and snake. Chapter 229. Angela stared at Wuming without blinking. Listening to Angela's words, Wuming couldn't help but remember the definition of steel and snake. Steel was born from serpents, and serpents were closely related to the earth. Whether it was the great sage equal to heaven, Sun Wukong, Perseus, or Neza, they were all related to the earth or the mother goddess of the earth. Sun Wukong was born from the earth and was a stubborn rock. Perseus was entrusted by Athena to kill Medusa. After receiving a series of help from Athena, Perseus successfully became a hero and married the princess. Although Neza was born with mortal flesh, he later cut his bones to return to his father and flesh to his mother. After his death, his master used the lotus root to reshape his physical body. Be it growing with the land or reshaping, forging, it was a trait of the god of steel. Although the god of steel was the archenemy of Dragon Snake, the god of steel was also the guardian of Dragon Snake. Not to mention Wuming, who was both the god of steel and Dragon Snake. Steel and serpent were of the same origin. Wuming, who had dual attributes, was the true guardian of dragon and serpent. Since that's the case, why don't you stay by my side? Wuming asked rather cordially. But no matter how he looked at it, he looked like a kidnapper. Okay. Angela nodded her little head. Ah, that detestable little bastard actually managed to obtain the favor of Lord Wuming. Oh, I'm so jealous. Ah, Satya bit her handkerchief hard as she screamed in her heart. Although Wuming didn't have the ability to read minds, he could still guess some things based on Satya's behavior. Wuming coughed and began to issue orders. Ahem. Satya, you've done well this time. You've successfully brought Angela to me in one piece. Don't mention it. This is what I should do. Seeing that Wuming's expression had turned serious, Satya also regained her composure and answered Wuming. Very good. I now have a new mission for you and Sebastian. Yes, Lord Wuming. Please give me your orders. When Sebastian heard Wuming calling for him, he knelt on one knee with Satya and waited for Wuming's orders. The arrival of the last king may be accompanied by the arrival of other gods. When the time comes, act according to the circumstances. Yes, Lord Wuming. Zaisha and Seabass received the order. It was not because Wuming was afraid or anything else. After all, the last king was not weak. Even if Wuming was very confident that he could defeat the last king, it was actually because he was confident in himself. After all, Wuming hadn't seen the last king's strength yet. Wuming wasn't 100% sure that he could defeat the last king, but he still had to maintain his confidence. Then, Angela, you can stay here for now. Remember, don't run around and stay here obediently. Your senior, Snake, is still in this house, so you have to get along well with her. As if he was talking to a child, Wuming reminded Angela. Yes, Angela knows. Angela nodded like child. This made Satya, who was at the side, unwilling to give up. She took out a handkerchief from who knows where and bit it. Lord Wuming, she's lying to you. You don't know how arrogant this little girl is. After Satya caught Angela in the United States, she brought her to hide everywhere. There was no other way. The American God-Slayer, John Pluto Smith, was too difficult to deal with. Satya was not afraid of him, but Angela was not. When Satya found Angela, she was resurrected by a cult magic society and was extremely weak. Not to mention the God-Slayer. Even a magician who knew some offensive magic could kill Angela. Therefore, Satya took Angela to hide everywhere. During this period, Angela was like a raging lowly. Although she was very afraid of Satya, she had already done certain things her own way, such as wearing clothes. Seeing Angela being so obedient in front of Wuming, Satya really wanted to slap her in the face. After settling Angela down, Wuming took Satya and Sebastian out of the house. However, Wuming did not notice that when they went out, a figure slipped out of the window of the room upstairs. Feeling the apocalyptic magic in the air, Wuming looked for the last king. Wuming looked at the changes around him and felt endless emotions. The flowers, plants, and trees on the ground began to gradually wither, especially the places close to the apocalyptic aura. It could be said that they were almost all withered. The barren earth began to crack, creating one fissure after another. The temperature of the ground gradually increased, and all the rivers and lakes on the ground gradually disappeared. With his good eyesight, Wuming saw that the sea level was falling bit by bit. The originally snow-white Mount Fuji also began to emit thick black smoke. Is the ground starting to heat up? Wuming frowned. This was not a good sign. It seems that no matter what, I have to defeat the last king as soon as possible. Wuming began to regret summoning the last king without making too much preparations. The price was too heavy for Earth. Then, there was only one thing he could do now, and that was to seize the time to defeat the last king. Then, Wuming took Satya and Sebastian to a beach. This was the place where the apocalyptic aura was the strongest. Guinevere, Lancelot, and a weary young man stood together with a masked figure wrapped in bandages. The weary young man held a holy sword similar to Excalibur in his hand. Wuming believed that this sword and Excalibur were twins. That should be the divine blade of salvation. Wuming had heard from Guinevere that the last king's weapon was the sword of salvation, a divine sword that could release the thunder of salvation. Obviously, the young man holding the sword of salvation was the last king. As for the bandaged man, Wuming guessed that it was very likely that he was summoned by the last king. In fact, Wuming's guess was right. The bandaged man was here to help the last king. Guinevere looked at Wuming worriedly, but Wuming could see that Guinevere was a little uneasy about him. Lancelot was still in full armor, and his appearance could not be seen. "My compatriot, it seems that you are not a god of this world." The last king spoke. As expected of the last king, he could tell at a glance that Wuming was not a native of this world. However, "You are indeed Vilo-Theranced." Just as Wuming was about to say something, the last king spoke again. Wuming keenly noticed that the trace of uneasiness in Guinevere's eyes had disappeared. In an instant, Wuming seemed to understand. "Then, my compatriot, my old enemy, let us quickly begin the slaughter. I can't stay on the ground for too long." "You know yourself well," Wuming said. Chapter 230. Wuming knew what the last king meant by, "I can't stay on the ground for too long." The last king also knew that as long as he stayed on the ground, he would cause global destruction to the earth. It could be seen from the chaos of spiritual veins all over the world that the last king brought about a global disaster. Of course, I tried very hard to avoid coming to the ground. When the last king said that sentence, Wuming seemed to think of something. Is that why the dragon snake attribute can't wake you up from myth? Wuming said to himself. Wuming now understood why a series of methods couldn't summon the last king to the ground. That was because the last king was avoiding appearing, or rather, he was avoiding appearing. When there were 6 godslayers and 1 demigod on the ground, the last king had already awakened, but he didn't reach the upper limit of the last king's awakening, so the last king endured and didn't appear in myth. When Wuming and Athena fought, although their dragon snake attribute also stimulated the last king, it was still a little short of the upper limit, so the last king didn't appear in the world. When Guinevere found the place where the last king slept, Guinevere chose the simplest, most violent, and most effective way, which was to summon the last king directly to the ground. That was what the last king couldn't resist, so the last king showed up, showing an extremely tired face. As you can see, King of Disobedience, as long as I stay in this world for a moment longer, the world will be destroyed because of me. Steel was born from the earth, so naturally, it could absorb the power of the earth. The great sage, Sun Wukong, could find spiritual veins to restore his power when his power was incomplete, so there was no reason why the last king couldn't. You must know about the ancient covenant, right? The last king suddenly asked. In fact, the ancient covenant was created for me, and what I hold is the most orthodox ancient covenant. Could it be? Wu Ming thought of a possibility. Yes, as long as there are multiple gods layers on the ground, my power will increase. As if to verify the last king's words, the magical power in the last king's body began to rise sharply. It instantly surpassed the total amount of magic power of Guinevere, Lancelot, and the bandaged man. Even Wu Ming, who had almost unlimited mana, was shocked. Now, Wu Ming had to admit that the last king was probably the strongest enemy he had ever faced. Then the last king raised the platinum blade in his hand. If you and the others had killed all the other gods layers before coming here, you might still have a chance of winning. Unfortunately, the platinum blade began to gather energy, and a small platinum ball began to gather at the tip of the platinum blade. You've already lost. In an instant, the platinum energy ball shot towards Wu Ming. Boom! A violent explosion occurred where Wu Ming and the others were standing. Dust covered everything. Guinevere looked on worriedly, but because of their different standpoints, Guinevere and Wu Ming were now enemies, so Guinevere didn't do anything. A breeze blew, and the smoke was blown away, revealing Wu Ming and the others. Wu Ming stretched out his hand, and a shield-like armor with 7 purple petals appeared in front of him. Obviously, it was the armor that blocked the last king's attack. 7 blazing rings, Roe Jacks. Wu Ming slowly said the name of the noble phantasm. That was the pseudo-noble phantasm that Wu Ming created with Create Green item. This was the noble phantasm that Wu Ming had learned from Wei Gong Shiro after his heroic spirit transformation. During the Trojan War, the bronze shield that was wrapped in 7 layers of cowhide was used to block the javelin of the hero Hector. Just like the rule breaker, it was a noble relic that was obtained after the sublimation of the anecdote. It was said that each petal was comparable to an ancient city wall. Crack! The Roe Jacks in front of Wu Ming shattered. After all, it was only a replica, and the last king's attack wasn't that easy to defend against. Naturally, the Roe Jacks broke as well. Noble phantasm, the last king frowned. I'm sorry, but the last king may have to disappoint you. While speaking, Wu Ming took out X silver from the golden ripple. Then, Wu Ming raised his right hand holding X silver and used Create Green item again. Golden particles gathered on Wu Ming's sword, changing the shape of X silver, and the original silver-white sword became golden. Unfortunately, I think I have a good chance of winning. What's that? Guinevere, Lancelot, and the rest were shocked when they saw the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand. That was because the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand was too similar to the last king's divine sword of salvation. Countless rays of light began to gather on the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand. Then, Wu Ming used the true name of the noble phantasm with both hands. Excalibur, Excalibur. Wu Ming swung his sword down heavily. Oh no! Lancelot immediately carried Guinevere and rode away on his white horse. Bandage Man also jumped lightly, and the wind carried him away. The last king did not move, and he looked at the golden torrent tiredly. The golden magical torrent rushed towards the last king, and the light and heat continued to attack him. In this world, Wu Ming, who had the identity of King Arthur, had the right to use the Excalibur. Silent Cry successfully used the Create Great item and X Silver to create the Excalibur Excalibur. A moment later, Wu Ming stopped using the noble phantasm and swung the sword. Wu Ming looked at the ground in front of him that looked like it had suffered a natural disaster. Lancelot, who had escaped earlier, carried Guinevere and stood aside. Bandage Man was floating in the sky with the wind, and a few of them looked at the scene caused by Wu Ming's attack. The land had been plowed once again, but a shield had appeared where the last king had been standing. The last king was holding an ancient shield, blocking Wu Ming's noble phantasm. Even the ground behind the last king was defended by the last king, which created a strange phenomenon. On the dilapidated ground, with the last king as the starting point, the ground behind him was still intact. After all, the last king had stayed there for a long time, and it had caused the ground to deteriorate. It looked intact on the surface, but there was no vitality inside. Wu-Ming had seen the shield that blocked the attack of the Excalibur not long ago. Aegis Shield. Wu-Ming said the shield's real name. Yes, it was the same shield that Athena used during the battle between Wu-Ming and Athena. Upon closer inspection, the shield looked exactly the same as Athena's shield, except for the lack of Medusa's head. Therefore, this shield should be called the Aegis. You are indeed the legendary King Arthur of Britain. You are right, this shield is Aegis. The last king's voice came from behind the shield. Chapter 231. The last king revealed himself and looked at Wu-Ming. Then, a grid similar to the Manchala formation appeared behind the last king. The last king placed Aegis on one of the grids. However, the moment Aegis touched the Manchala formation, the shield turned into nothingness. Then, the Manchala formation disappeared. This shield is really Aegis, the last king said again. But I'm a little confused. Why can you use Aegis? Wu-Ming began to suspect the last king's identity and guessed his real name. After all, not everyone could use Aegis. I'm sorry, but I have no comment, the last king said quietly. Let's end this quickly. With that, the last king charged at Wu-Ming with his divine sword. Wu-Ming was not to be outdone either. He charged at the last king with his divine sword. The two began the most primitive hand-to-hand combat. Bandage Man, who was floating in the sky, saw the last king and Wu-Ming fighting. He wanted to go up and help the last king, but boom! A blazing flame rushed at Bandage Man with a sound that broke through the sound barrier. Bandage Man hurriedly used the wind to block it. I can't let you disturb Lord Wu-Ming. Satya was fully armed and wore a magenta full body armor. She held a pike in her right hand and maintained the traces of a magic formation in her left hand. She smiled at Bandage Man, then, I'll kill you first. With that, Bandage Man charged at Satya. Ha 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 ha. Then come and try. Let's see if you can kill me. Nasrik's strongest one-on-one combat power. With that, Satya charged at Bandage Man as well. On the other side, Guinevere and Lancelot. Lancelot put Guinevere down as he spoke. Although I've already made a contract with my lord, now is not the time for the contract to be established. I still have an obligation to help my lord. Then, Lancelot looked at the confused Guinevere. You've been demoted to godly ancestor. Don't get involved in battles that you can't participate in. In fact, Lancelot didn't want Guinevere to be entangled with the last king and Wu-Ming, which was why he told Guinevere to stay here. After all, even though Guinevere had been demoted to a godly ancestor, he was still very powerful. After all, the godly ancestor of the United States, Angela, was able to fight with the American godly slayer, John Pluto Smith, and was defeated by John in the end. However, Angela had proven the power of a godly ancestor. Then, Lancelot galloped over on his horse. Uncle, Guinevere looked at Lancelot's departing figure and began to recall. In fact, before Wu-Ming arrived, Guinevere and Lancelot had already noticed that the last king was exhausted from the battle. Therefore, they took the opportunity to inform the last king of their thoughts. Guinevere recalled his conversation with the last king. I see. Do you two want to enter King Arthur's myth? The last king said. Guinevere and Lancelot were a little uneasy at the moment. After all, in the eyes of some strict monarchs, this was considered betrayal. Actually, you don't have to ask me. The last king seemed to see their concerns and comforted them. We're not monarchs and subjects. We're just partners walking on the same path. That's right. Although Guinevere and Lancelot kept calling each other master and my lord, the three of them were just partners. Moreover, you are indeed Guinevere and Lancelot now. It's normal for you to want to return to the monarch you truly serve. The last king said calmly. However, this agreement still needs to be fulfilled. The last king said again, if I kill him, then you will have no one to serve. Look forward to him killing me, Guinevere, Lancelot. After that, the last king didn't say anything. The timeline turned to the present. Guinevere returned to his senses and looked at Lancelot, who was about to go to support Lancelot. "Uncle, you are right. No matter what happens in the future, I am still his lordship's maidservant. I will fight for his lordship." What was loyalty? Guinevere finally chose loyalty between loyalty and love. He wanted to be loyal to the very end. "I can't let you disturb his battle, God's ancestor." Guinevere turned his head and looked at the source of the voice. A girl wearing a Greek off-shoulder dress and a garland on her head came over. "You are Lord Athena." Yes, that girl was the ancient mother goddess Athena, who once again restored her Trinity true body. Because Wu Ming left the Gorgon stone on the table and specifically told Athena, Athena took advantage of Wu Ming's absence and quietly followed him. In fact, Wu Ming left the Gorgon stone so that Athena could protect herself. After all, Athena had just been severely injured by Wu Ming. "Are you going to stop me, Lord Athena?" Guinevere looked at the approaching Athena and asked. "Can't help it. I am already his subordinate god. If my master god is in trouble, of course I will help him." Athena's serpentine eyes flashed. "Didn't you just lose to Lord Villo? You must be very weak now." Guinevere asked. "You don't have to worry about that." Athena licked her lips and smiled seductively. "I am confident that I can stall you, who has been demoted from Earth Mother to God's ancestor. Is that so?" Guinevere took a deep breath. "Then, you are Guinevere's enemy." The battle was about to begin. When Lancelot rode his white horse toward the last king and Wu Ming, he suddenly stopped. An old man came straight in front of him. "Snake?" Lancelot felt the urge to kill the enemy as a steel blade. "Nice to meet you. You are Lancelot, right? My name is Sebastian Dean, Wu Ming, Sama's subordinate. I'm sorry to say that you can't pass through here." Sebastian bowed and said politely, "Then you shall be my opponent, Snake." Silent Cry and the last king fought back and forth, sword chi flying and mana radiating in all directions, constantly destroying the land that had already been destroyed once. As expected of King Arthur's strongest knight, Villo Theranced, a man with great martial arts skills, Wu Ming also praised. "It's the same for you. I can feel that your martial arts skills have been honed through experience." However, there was one thing that Wu Ming didn't say. That was, Wu Ming felt a kind of king's spirit. Chapter 232. Wu Ming was chatting with the last king, trying to find the last king's weakness through the conversation. "Indeed, I've gone through hardships that ordinary people can't go through. In reality, it's my own choice." "Your own choice?" Wu Ming analyzed secretly. "So, disobedient king, do you know why I'm called the last king and why I'm called the hero?" Wu Ming narrowed his eyes when he heard what the last king said. That was the question that Wu Ming was thinking about earlier. Indeed, the last king was the existence that killed all the demon kings on the ground. In that case, the last king must be extremely powerful. However, that was unrealistic. Wu Ming did not believe that the last king could kill all the godslayers that had died since ancient times by relying on his martial arts alone. If that were the case, the last king would not be a threat at all. Wu Ming would have killed him long ago. After all, the last king must be a disobedient god. There was no god that was invincible in mythology. Even those who were close to being invincible had a fatal weakness. That was fixed. Wu Ming speculated that the last king had a special item or skill. The ancient covenant was a special skill. As long as there were godslayers on the ground, the ancient covenant would work. It would give the hero, the last king, the number of godslayers a multiplier. However, merely increasing the last king's ability did not mean that he would be able to kill any godslayers. Wu Ming had a bold guess based on the fact that the last king had used the aegis that not everyone could use and the Manchala formation that appeared behind the last king when he stored the aegis. "You have all the god relics that the gods have given you." Wu Ming looked at the last king firmly and answered the last king's question. The last king smiled in response to Wu Ming's guess. "You're right." With that, the Manchala phalanx once again appeared behind the last king. Immediately after, every grid in the Manchala square formation shone with a golden light. Under the golden glow, Wu Ming could clearly see all sorts of god relics of all shapes and sizes being stored in the Manchala formation. Wuming could not help but narrow his eyes. The gods created the position of the last king. In order for the last king to kill any of the gods' layers, the gods gave their god relics to the last king. The god relics in the Manchala formation began to glow one after another, as if they were following the last king's words. And because of that, I became an existence that could kill any god slayer, the last king said emotionlessly. After all, the authority that the gods' layers seized came from the gods, and the gods all had their own weaknesses. These weaknesses were exploited by the gods' layers, causing the gods' layers to kill the gods and turn their human bodies into gods' layers. However, at the same time, the gods' layers who obtained the authority of the gods they killed would also obtain the gods' weaknesses. Just like when Wuming was facing Perseus, he wanted to seal Wuming's authority with the light of Mitra, the master of Welleslana. However, Wuming's authority was no longer Welleslana's authority. Welleslana's authority was combined with Mekker's authority. After the elevation of Welleslana's authority through Mekker's relic, the god's authority had successfully turned into Wuming's relic, the 12 clones. Therefore, Perseus could not seal Wuming's authority. Meanwhile, the last king who possessed the god relics that could target all the gods' weaknesses became an existence that could suppress all the gods' layers and kill them. This is one of my biggest trump cards as the last king. The last king said calmly. The last king has obtained the gate of Babylon in disguise. Wuming could not help but grumble to himself. After all, Gilgamesh's gate of Babylon had the prototype of all the relics. All in all, the last king's Manchala square was even more of a cheat than Gilgamesh's gate of Babylon. The Manchala square had all the god relics. However, there were no items that were not god's weapons in the Manchala square. Like the 7 rings of burning sky, Roe Jax, and Rule Breaker talisman, Rule Breaker, there were no noble phantoms in the Manchala formation behind the last king. Unfortunately, I don't think you're invincible, Wuming said as he stood opposite the last king with a golden sword in his hand. As mentioned earlier, the last king was also the god of disobedience. As long as it was the god of disobedience, it would definitely have a weakness. Even Wuming had a weakness. You're right. I'm not invincible. The last king did not beat around the bush and admitted it generously. I was killed by the ancient gods' layers. However, after I recovered my strength in this divine sword, I reappeared in the human world and killed the gods' layers who killed me once. Moreover, I've never been so confident before. The last king closed his tired eyes as if he was reminiscing. During the ancient times, the gods' layers killed the last king when he was still weak before he recovered his strength, turning him into a divine sword. Now, the reason why the last king was at his strongest as soon as he was born was all thanks to Guinevere and Lancelot. Take Sun Wukong, for example. When he was released, he had to find a spiritual vein to recover his strength because of the lack of mana. The reason why the last king did not need to be like Sun Wukong was because he was the strongest steel and also because of the Holy Grail created by Guinevere. As the strongest steel, the last king could absorb the essence of the earth for his own use as long as he stood on the ground. This was also why the earth began to lose its vitality after the last king descended. Flowers and plants withered, trees died, cracks appeared in the earth, oceans evaporated, and volcanoes began to stir. This was all because the last king had absorbed the essence of the earth. However, the most important thing was the Holy Grail created by Guinevere. The Holy Grail was an existence that provided the last king with abundant mana when he descended. In the past, he was revived with full health. Now, he was revived with full health and mana. The two symbolize different things. In addition, because he was absorbing the essence of the earth, his vitality and mana were constantly recovering, making him stronger all the time. This was the reason why the last king was so confident. Moreover, the god of disobedience is only a projection of God on the earth. Even if I die once, I can't continue to be a projection the next time. That's unfortunate, the last king. Wuming looked at the last king with a smile and continued. I came to this world in my true form. The last king narrowed his eyes. What Wuming meant was obvious. As long as he killed Wuming, he would not be revived. Well then, let me experience the power of the god relics that the gods have given me. Chapter 233. Wuming put down the holy sword as soon as he was done speaking. The holy sword was engulfed by the golden ripple. Subsequently, Wuming placed his hand in the golden ripple. Subsequently, the last king put down the savior sword, as if he was responding to Wuming. A glow appeared in the Manchala formation behind him. Subsequently, countless god relics shot towards Wuming like bullets. Wuming analyzed the magic contained in the god relics. The last king was using the power of the god relics to cause explosive damage to the enemy. Wuming could not help but smile as he watched the familiar scene. My disciple has used this technique before. As her master, it's completely useless to me. Seeing that countless god relics were about to shoot towards Wuming, a series of golden ripples appeared behind Wuming. Walla walla! Countless golden chains whizzed out of the golden ripples with clanking sounds. The Enkidu had a special effect on divinity. Given that the Enkidu had evolved, it could fight the god relics of the gods and Buddhas in the sky. It could even suppress them slightly. Bang! 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 Countless god relics collided with the golden chains, causing a series of large-scale explosions. Boom! 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 The dust created by the intense explosions drowned each other. Wuming waved his hand, and a magical wind blew the dust away, revealing the last king who was frowning. What do you think, last king? Do you still want to try? Wuming smirked slowly as he looked at the last king. The last king did not say anything. Instead, he used his actions to prove himself. Since the god relics did not work on Lin Huang, he would use the god relics to fight Lin Huang. That was what the last king thought. A glow appeared in one of the Manchala formation behind the last king. Subsequently, a golden longbow appeared in the last king's hand. The last king drew the bow, and 9 illusory flame arrows appeared on the golden longbow. Ho-e-bow! As the last king shouted the god relic's real name, the 9 arrows that could shoot down the sun were shot towards Wuming. Wuming did not panic. He extended his hand, and a gigantic ancient stone bow appeared in Wuming's hand. Wuming pulled the stone bow into a full moon and shouted the relic's real name. 9 lives kill 100 monsters. Wuming, who had analyzed the Berserker's Hercules class card, would naturally use Hercules' noble phantasm to kill hundreds of heroic spirits. After all the information of the heroic spirits were stored in the class card. Meanwhile, Wuming used the create green item to bring the relic back to the world. Although Hercules was a Berserker, the kill 100 spirits was a bow relic. However, with the help of the great hero Hercules' skill, it was transformed into a cold weapon relic. With Wuming's skill, it was naturally possible for him to transform it. Moreover, by using the bow to kill hundreds of 9 lives, the damage of the noble relic had increased by quite a bit. As the pseudo-relic's real name was released, the 9 demigod arrows that killed the giant venomous snake Hydra collided with the 9 sunset arrows that were shot out from the Ho-e-bow. Boom! The 9 flame arrows collided with the 9 divine arrows, creating an intense explosion. Subsequently, the giant bow in Wuming's hand shattered. The last king frowned and put the Ho-e-bow away. He then took out another god relic from the Manchala formation. It was a javelin that shone like a meteor. Gungnir. The last king shouted the javelin's name. The javelin was like a meteor, piercing through the atmosphere and shooting toward Wuming. Immediately, the create green item light appeared in Wuming's palm. Wuming condensed the relic, and a scarlet spear appeared in Wuming's hand. Gibal. The scarlet devil spear shot out explosively. The god king's spear that would definitely hit the enemy and the demonic spear that would definitely hit the enemy's heart collided. The 2 weapons collided, creating sparks, and then returned to the hands of the last king and Wuming. Gibalg shattered when it returned to Wuming's hand, and the Gungnir was firmly grasped by the last king. You always make the first move. This time it's my turn. With that said, Wu Ming put his palms together and activated Create Green Item. A large amount of magical power burst out of Wu Ming's body. The last king looked at Wu Ming vigilantly. The magical power that Wu Ming exuded was comparable to the magical power of a god slayer. Then, a long red rod with a golden gauntlet appeared in Wu Ming's hand. That's Enuma. The last king revealed the true name of this weapon because the last king's Manchala phalanx also had this weapon. Although the Enuma that Wu Ming took out was different from the Enuma in the last king's memory, there was no doubt that it was the world sword that recreated the scene of hell before the world was created, Enuma. If that's the case, I'll take it out as well. The Manchala formation behind the last king shone brightly as he spoke. A weapon similar to Enuma with a golden gauntlet and a red rod appeared in the last king's hand. It happened to verify Wu Ming's speculation. Since the Savior Divine Sword was so similar to the Excalibur, perhaps all the relics in the Shinua world had the same appearance and ability as all the god relics in this world. However, I don't believe that you can fully unleash the power of these god relics. The last king. That was right. Even the gods had their own selfish motives. Although the gods and Buddhas had given their god relics to the last king, including the Enuma level god relics, there must be a limit to these god relics. Have you noticed? The last king secretly frowned. In reality, Wu Ming was right. Just like how the god of disobedience's manifestation had a restriction to weaken its power, the last king could not master these god relics at all. He was only in a superficial state. In other words, he was a layman. However, it was the same for Wu Ming. Although Wu Ming could create the god relics that he knew using Create Green Item, Wu Ming was just like the last king. He was a layman and could only use them simply. However, even if a layman was given a gun, he could kill someone. If a layman was given a mobile machine gun array that could be activated with just a button, he would be able to kill almost everyone. That was the reason why the last king said that these god relics were his trump cards. If he did not have the ability to resist or dodge the god relics earlier, he would not have been able to withstand the god relics barrage with his body alone. After snapping back to his senses, Wu Ming lifted Enuma and pointed it at the last king, revealing the real name of the god relic. At that moment, the last king shouted the god relic's name. Enuma, heaven and earth distortion, star of creation, Enuma. Almost at the same time, two red hurricanes that tore through space collided. Chapter 234. As the red storm collided with each other, the space around them shattered like pieces of glass. Within the void fault created by the space shattering, there was only darkness. In the dark, some dark matter could be seen vaguely. When he saw the dark matter, Wu Ming's inner alarm went off. And it was also because of this warning that Wu Ming realized that he was a little addicted to the battle just now. Although it didn't affect him much, Wu Ming didn't like to be controlled by impulse. This is considered a blessing in disguise. Wu Ming thought to himself. At the same time, Wu Ming and the last king stopped using the Enuma sword. Soon, the broken space recovered bit by bit. The Enuma sword in Wu Ming's hand shattered and disappeared. Although Wu Ming could create an Enuma sword that could not be replicated, the sword could only be used as a one-time missile. If he wanted to use it again, he would have to create a new one. Moreover, the mana required to create an Enuma sword was thousands of times more than the mana required to create other relics. Fortunately, Wu Ming had studied the Enuma sword from Gilgamesh when he was in Uruk. He was only able to create it with the help of Kalas. Needless to say, the magic costume that Zelik made for Wu Ming was perfect for Wu Ming. If he could create it a few more times, Wu Ming might not need Kalas's help anymore. However, since Wu Ming had only created it once, he could not replicate it. As the topic changed, Wu Ming recalled the dark matter that he had seen earlier. I can't be wrong. The dark matter is the same as the black mud that Julian used. At this moment, the last king, who had put away the Enuma sword, spoke. It seems like there's something outside this world. You should know about it, since you're from another world. Wu Ming frowned and thought about it. Then he shook his head. I don't really know what it is. I only know that it's dangerous. After all, Wu Ming had no idea what it was that had the same aura as Wu Ming. Looking at Wu Ming's serious face, the last king chose to believe what Wu Ming said. It seems like as long as we don't open the space from the outside world, they won't be able to affect this world. That's true, but who knows if the darkness will find a way to come into this world. After all, Aria's heart had been corroded by the darkness, and he had completely fallen to the dark side. Moreover, you and I have already opened the tunnel earlier. Wu Ming meant that the dark matter might have already come to this world. Is that so? But it's a pity that I don't want to get involved in this mess anymore. The reason why humans can slay gods and become god slayers that are neither human nor god is because humans have unlimited possibilities. The calamities of this era will be left to the people of this era to resist. I will only do one thing, and that is to kill you demon kings that shouldn't exist in this world, then quickly go into hibernation. With that, the last king raised the sword of salvation. Wu Ming also agreed with the last king's words about humans have infinite possibilities, and the disaster of this era should be resisted by the people of this era. Moreover, even if the last king wanted to stay on the ground to protect humans, Wu Ming would not allow it. As long as the last king stood on the ground, it wouldn't take long for the entire Earth to fall into desolation until it became a dead planet. It's strange, the last king. As a disobedient god and the strongest god of steel, you hate fighting so much. Wu Ming looked at the last king with some playfulness. The reason why the disobedient gods were called disobedient gods was that they were mentally abnormal and disobedient to their own myths. This also meant that the disobedient gods were belligerent. Whether it was Welslana, Mekhl, Athena, Perseus, Neza, Sisu, or even Lancelot, who is the shadow of God, these disobedient gods were all belligerent, including the god slayers who killed the disobedient gods, Warban, Luo Hao, and Salvatore. These three were the kind of people who would fight without saying a word. Although some god slayers were not keen on fighting, such as Yarek, Madame Aisha, and Hardadef, they still had the desire to fight in their bones. This was the constitution of the god slayers that could not be changed. As the strongest god of steel among the disobedient gods, they were the most belligerent. It was like the relationship between ordinary people and a fighting race. Just kidding. Back to the topic, as the last king of the strongest god of steel, he was neither mentally abnormal nor belligerent like other gods of steel. In Wu Ming's opinion, the reason why the last king fought was that he wanted to sleep as soon as possible so that the earth would not completely lose its vitality. The last king did not want to be a hero who killed the gods. If there was a chance, the last king would choose to leave his identity as a hero. Wu Ming was not surprised. Because of this, there was no doubt that being the last king was very abnormal. Because he was not keen on fighting, the last king sighed and then explained, "That's because of my brother." As if in response to the last king's words, a black shadow appeared behind the last king, and that black shadow simply appeared and then disappeared immediately. My brother helped me shoulder everything. He shouldered all the negative mental effects that a disobedient god should have. That was why my brother could only follow behind me, always in a state of chaos, while I became like the character in the legends. That was one of the reasons why the last king wanted to sleep as soon as possible. He didn't want to see his brother help him bear the chaos anymore. But because of the influence of the earth on the last king since ancient times, the last king became so tired. So that's how it is. The last king. I probably guessed your real name. Wu Ming smiled. Really? So what? Come on, let's fight. The last king was not worried that Wu Ming would use the last king's real name to find his weakness. However, instead of saying that he was not worried, it was better to say that the last king had a glimmer of hope, hoping that Wu Ming could defeat him. That was what Wu Ming saw from the last king's eyes. The eyes were the window of the soul. That sentence was true. So let's start the second round. Holy light and lightning intertwined as the second round between Wu Ming and the last king began. Chapter 235. Wu Ming and the last king once again began their hand-to-hand combat. The last king's divine sword of salvation was surrounded by lightning. Each of his attacks contained the lightning of salvation. Each of the last king's attacks contained supreme power. Wu Ming blocked the attacks with his sacred sword. Each of the attacks gave Wu Ming immense pressure. In the ancient times, I killed the God-slayer with my own strength and the ancient agreement. The last king began to tell the story as he fought Wu Ming. However, since my information was exposed, it became harder and harder to kill the God-slayer, the last king lamented. After that, the gods gave me some of their god relics. The last king kept swinging the divine sword of salvation at Wu Ming while Wu Ming blocked the attacks with his sacred sword. He continued to listen to the last king's story. Every time I killed a god-slayer, the gods would give me their god relics. Just like that, I have almost all of the gods' god relics. The last king swung the divine sword of salvation hard, forcing Wu Ming to retreat. Wu Ming, who was holding his sword with both hands, sank deep into the ground. Deep scratches were left on the ground as he was forced to retreat. The combination of these god relics formed the Manchala formation. It's the divine sword of salvation with supreme power. The last king pointed the divine sword at Wu Ming again as soon as he was done speaking. Zzz, zzz, zzz. The lightning of salvation continued to surge on the divine blade of salvation. Subsequently, the lightning of salvation was shot at Wu Ming like a bullet by the divine sword of salvation. Dong! A thunderous explosion was heard. The lightning of salvation hit Wu Ming accurately. However, the last king frowned. With the support of the ancient agreement, he could clearly sense that Wu Ming was not dead because the power in the last king's body did not diminish. Moreover, the last king did not believe that Wu Ming would be killed so easily. As expected, the glow of the sacred sword was revealed as soon as the dust from the explosion dissipated. The divine sword is indeed powerful. Unfortunately, my sacred sword is not weak either. Wu Ming said, a relic-level mana gathered on the sacred sword that he was holding. The sacred sword shone brightly. The last king looked at Wu Ming cautiously as he thought that Wu Ming was going to activate his relic. A large amount of mana was attached to the sacred sword, forming a layer of mana blade that was 3 meters tall. Subsequently, Wu Ming swung it. Although Wu Ming and the last king were fighting by the sea, the last king was the last king. The sea level began to drop. Putting aside the fact that Alice and the others were trying their best to stabilize the spirit vein, the water source near Wu Ming and the last king was either evaporated by the last king's passive attack or by the mana or skills released during their battle. Therefore, there was no longer a trace of water in the area. The last king waved his divine blade of salvation, and the thunder of salvation flashed, canceling out Wu Ming's huge blade of mana. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you a curse. Evil people can't hit me. The moment he heard the words, the last king felt that his eyes were dazzled. Wu Ming instantly teleported in front of the last king. Wu Ming raised the 3 meters tall mana blade and swung it at the last king. The last king had dynamic vision and captured Wu Ming's movements. However, being able to capture it didn't mean that he could react. The speed was so fast that it was suffocating. The heat on the mana blade was comparable to the previous Excalibur. There was no doubt that if the last king was hit by this sword, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. The definition of a relic was to inject mana into the relic and shout the relic's true name to release the power contained in the relic. However, Wu Ming was thinking that if the Holy Sword was infused with magic comparable to the Holy Sword's noble phantasm, without calling out the noble phantasm's true name, would the power of a Holy Sword without releasing its true name be comparable to the power of a noble phantasm? There is no doubt that Wu Ming's method was successful at the moment. Wu Ming first used mana and added a layer of 3 meters tall mana blade on the Holy Sword to expand the attack range of the Holy Sword. Then, Wu Ming compressed the mana used to release a relic into the mana blade on the outer layer of the Holy Sword. The outer layer of the mana blade was successfully transformed into a normal attack that was comparable to the release of a relic. Swoosh! With the skills and dynamic vision that he had gained from fighting countless godslayers since ancient times, the last king successfully dodged Wuming's fatal attack. Boom! The last king dodged, but the price was that the ground suffered another large-scale destruction. The entire coast cracked open like a turtle, and then it shattered. Now, the entire ground level had been lowered, although it was caused by man-made physics. The 3 meters tall mana blade that was attached to the outer layer of the holy sword disappeared after cracking the ground. With just one attack, the mana attached to the holy sword that was comparable to a relic was instantly consumed. Although this move was quite powerful, the consumption of mana was also visible to the naked eye. Therefore, it was estimated that this move could only be used by Wuming. The relic was the trump card of the servant, the decisive weapon that changed the outcome of the battle. Therefore, the relic could not be used lightly. In the ordinary Holy Grail War, generally speaking, the servant only had one relic, but there were many servants who had multiple relics. For the servants whose magic attribute was D level or below, releasing a relic would almost exhaust the servant's mana. If it was a C-level servant, it would be in a dangerous state. When the relic was released, if it did not achieve the expected effect, or if the opponent did not die, the servant who could not release the relic without mana was basically dead. Of course, there were also servants whose noble phantoms did not consume much mana, but that was a minority, and this kind of servant basically had a fatal weakness, so let's not talk about it for now. Then, Wuming released his own mana and attached it to the holy sword. The last king also captured the entire process, which took less than 0.1 seconds. None of the servants could use their noble phantoms with a gap of 0.1 seconds, and it was unlikely that any servant could use their noble phantoms for more than 10 times in a row. Even if there were multiple relic, it was not necessarily the case. And there is no servant with enough mana to support all of this. Wuming, who was in the state of lightning speed, turned in an instant and slashed at the last king. Clang! The last king, who was prepared, caught Wuming's attack, and then immediately bounced off Wuming. Immediately, the last king raised the Sword of Salvation, and the Sword of Salvation emitted a dazzling light. Light of Salvation, eliminate the filth. In an instant, the lightning speed and mana blade on Wuming disappeared. Chapter 236. So that's how it is. Is this also one of the uses of the Blade of Salvation? Wuming, who exited the seraphic speed state, held the holy sword in his hand and looked at the last king. You're right. The Blade of Salvation has the lightning of salvation that can purify everything in the world. This light of salvation is another use of the lightning of salvation. After sacrificing the attack, although the light of salvation doesn't cause any damage, it can purify a series of negative effects and even eliminate the enemy's power boost. It has an extremely powerful advantage. The last king held the Blade of Salvation with a calm face. Don't say that I'm cheating. King of disobedience, this is also a use of the Blade of Salvation. In this regard, Wuming shook his head. This is also your power. Of course, I won't say anything, but Wuming has already noticed the weakness of the light of salvation. As long as the light of salvation doesn't reach, then it can't remove the enemy's power boost. With that, Wuming began to chant a new language. Although that's the case, as long as I cover my body with the light of salvation, you won't be able to get close to me. But then, you won't be able to attack, right? Wuming's rebuttal left the last king speechless. It can't be helped. The light of salvation is so powerful, but because of this, it must have a limit. If that's the case, then I'll use this. With that, the last king took out a metal disc covered with 2 golden sword-shaped runes. That was the authority of the last king that Guinevere has been holding, the arrowhead disc. The moment the last king finished speaking, the arrowhead disc emitted a light. The golden sword runes flashed and turned into 2 figures that flew out from it. I didn't expect to see you again, King of Disobedience. Last time, I was completely defeated. I didn't expect to see you here. Old son, didn't have enough last time. One of them was a handsome golden-haired youth riding a Pegasus. The other was a golden-haired monkey king standing on a golden cloud and wearing golden chainmail. Perseus, son Wukong. Wuming was now completely sure of the arrowhead's ability. Ever since Guinevere had absorbed Perseus, whom Wuming had killed into the Disk of Light for the first time, Wuming had been wondering if the Disk of Light could revive the dead god of steel for its own use, since it could absorb them. This was the result. The arrowhead's disk is my omnipotent weapon. Don't say that I'm bullying you, the king of disobedience. Then the last king spoke to Perseus and the great sage, heaven's equal. My compatriot, the proud steel, please lend me a hand. Perseus waved his long robe and got down from the white heavenly horse. He took out the weapon at his waist. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, the comrade before us is very powerful. Sun Wukong scratched his ears and smiled. Since you're willing to give me a chance to kill my enemy, I don't mind helping you. Then, Sun Wukong took out the Jingu Bang from his ear. Wuming carefully observed the two resurrected gods. He did not believe that the last king's Disk of Light could revive them completely. Then, Sun Wukong and Perseus rushed toward Wuming. Sun Wukong arrived at Wuming's side, first with lightning speed. The Jingu Bang that weighed 13,500 pounds was aimed at Wuming's head. Clank! Wuming blocked with his sword. Then, Wuming released the Blade of Magic again. The Blade of Magic was used by Wuming again. Wuming sent Sun Wukong flying. Then, a few arrows that seemed ordinary but contained divine power shot toward Wuming. Wuming dodged and swiftly evaded. However, sizzle, sizzle, the violent thunder of salvation hit Wuming. The last king had predicted the trajectory of Wuming, who was in lightning speed. Wuming flew backward and fell to the ground. The ground suddenly exploded. The dust caused by the violent impact buried Wuming's figure. Since you're looking for death, I won't be polite with you. Wuming's voice was filled with anger as it came out from the smoke. Lightning, lightning, lightning. I'm the conqueror who can defeat thousands with white, tens of thousands with 1,000, and tens of thousands with 10,000. Now, please shine brightly for me who is on the side of justice. Give me divine power, supreme lightning, increase exponentially. The long and short needles in Wuming's heart pointed to the 9 o'clock direction at the same time, activating the double incarnation state that would be unavailable for a while after using it. Countless lightning bolts, as thick as buckets, rushed out of the dust. One of the lightning bolts instantly arrived in front of the king closest to Wuming. That was Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong had already been paralyzed by Wuming's lightning aura after using double Thunder God's incarnation. I am the one who crushes all the enemies and enmity between humans and demons. That was the God of Thunder's incarnation's amplification spirit, which could increase his power again. In an instant, countless lightning pillars with a diameter of 3 or 4 meters buried Sun Wukong. Ah! Sun Wukong let out a sorrowful cry. Then, the resurrected Monkey King turned into ashes. At that moment, the stone plate in Wuming's heart, which represented the 9 o'clock direction of Thunder God's incarnation, emitted a red light as if a machine overheated. The lightning pillars outside also revealed Wuming's figure. Then, Wuming looked at Perseus again. It's you. It's you. Perseus was shocked. After all, Wuming could easily defeat him before. Now, he had turned the famous great sage, heaven's equal to heaven, into ashes. Perseus was alarmed at this moment. I will deny the sky, deny the earth, the storm will destroy everything, and the shower will cover everything. With a wind that can continue to rise until the point, combined with this supreme divine power, I will make everything in the world bow down to me. In an instant, the two needles that originally pointed to Thunder God's incarnation turned and pointed to the 4 o'clock direction of Thunder God's incarnation. What followed was a torrential downpour of wind. The violent wind blew away everything around Wuming, including the ground, the air, and Perseus, who was standing not far away from the last king. The storm rolled up everything on the beach, and even the dry coast, soil, rocks, withered grass, rotten trees, and everything was instantly crushed by the violent wind and turned into dust covering the sky and the earth, falling like a drizzle. This included Perseus, who had a shocked expression on his face just a second ago. At this moment, he also turned into wisps of magic and disappeared. In just a few seconds, Wu Ming killed the two enemies he had killed before. At that time, the last king, who moved because of the wind, opened his eyes, looked at the scene in front of him, and fell into silence. Chapter 237. Wu Ming looked at the silent last king and smiled while wiping a few drops of sweat on his cheeks. Wu Ming, who was in his human form, felt a little tired after using double incarnation twice in a row. The physical burden of double incarnation was not something that anyone could bear. Wu Ming got his noble phantasm through his own noble phantasm. Before the noble phantasm was upgraded, the noble phantasm itself would be said according to Wu Ming's specific situation. As the dragon of origin, Wu Ming was a high-level existence. Although he was still a baby, he was still the dragon of origin. Therefore, Wu Ming's noble phantasm had a great suppressive ability when compared with noble phantasm of the same level. Moreover, those noble phantasms had the ability to evolve infinitely. As a god's authority, Wu Ming's noble phantasm was undoubtedly the most powerful noble phantasm in EX. It could be said to be the EX of EX. However, that also meant that the burden of using noble phantasm was extremely difficult for others. In terms of physical burden alone, if he revealed his true form, Wu Ming was confident that he could penetrate the earth with pure physical strength. Although his physical strength was reduced in his human form, his body was still strong. Let's look at his magical power consumption. Wu Ming, who used double incarnation twice in a row, consumed as much magical power as multiple godslayers. For a magician, obtaining the Holy Grail represented endless magical power. Even if the previous servant obtained the Holy Grail, even if he had been using Noble Phantasm, he didn't know how long it would take to completely exhaust the Holy Grail's magical power, and that was under the premise that the Holy Grail did not automatically restore its magical power. Take the Holy Grail made by Guinevere as an example. The last king used it as a primer to restore his magical power to its full state. Moreover, because he was standing on the earth, his magical power limit was still constantly breaking through. If it weren't for Wu Ming being the dragon of origin, his magical power was almost infinite, and when Wu Ming incarnated as a servant, his magical power storage was also EX level. If Wu Ming's strongest stat was his magical power, it was undoubtedly his magical power. The level of magical power completely suppressed the sum of strength, agility, durability, and noble phantasm. As for luck, although that could be expressed in data, who could say for sure? All in all, Wu Ming just used 2 double incarnations. At this moment, although his magical power was sufficient, that was the first time Wu Ming felt his magical power was greatly reduced. For Wu Ming, who had never felt a lack of magical power, it was really rare. Well, but it's not a big deal. I guessed it right. You're now weak, last king. Wu Ming grinned happily. Although using the arrowhead disc can summon the dead steel, I have to give them a part of my power, and have my authority to resurrect them. They only have 80% of their power. If they die in battle, you won't be able to get back the power you gave them, right? That's right. That's why the last king didn't use the arrowhead disc. The arrowhead disc summoned steel at the cost of his own power. After these steel died, they would directly return to the mythical realm with this power. Therefore, the power of the last king was weakened. And killing these steel can't get the authority because these steel came from the arrowhead disc, the authority of the last king. Killing them only means that the authority of the last king is ineffective. It doesn't matter. Even if my power is weakened, I still have the Sword of Salvation. Moreover, I am now enough to support the power of the Sword of Salvation. The last king said indifferently after waving the Sword of Salvation twice. But you, if I'm not mistaken, You have several authorities that you can't use right now. Wu Ming frowned. Now, in addition to the incarnation representing Thunder God, which was in a red alert state, the stone plate representing Storm and Phoenix were also in a red alert state and temporarily couldn't be used. Previously, Wu Ming wanted to use double Phoenix incarnation with Blade of Mana to take down the last king in one fell swoop. However, because he was too close, he couldn't react in time, and the light of salvation from the last king's divine sword of salvation shone on him. Wu Ming's double Phoenix incarnation was forced to withdraw and entered red alert. However, Wu Ming now almost figured out the last king's routine, and he summarized several sets of plans in his mind. After thinking for a while, Wu Ming decided to implement one of the plans. Now, you have almost guessed my identity. Don't you want to use your sword of spirit speech? The last king said without sadness or joy. Wu Ming just smiled at that. Although I know your identity, if I use the sword of spirit speech, your light of salvation will become a problem. Manchala phalanx doesn't work on me, and the lightning of salvation can't hurt me accurately. Now, you can only limit my power with the light of salvation. So, I decided to take the simplest way. Wu Ming rushed to the last king. Thou hast violated the contract and brought sin to the world. On Sunday, the sinner shall be punished. Crush his back, dig out his bones, hair, and brain, and trample on his blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot get close to the darkness, I will follow the Lord's words and destroy thee. God says human beings are sinful. God says human beings need to be purified. Thus, the torrential flood is bestowed upon me. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant equal relief. Wu Ming's inner pointers pointed to 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock respectively. Annihilation Avatar and Flood Avatar were activated. The sea, which was almost dried up because of the existence of the last king, suddenly soared. A huge wave of tens of meters high rose from the horizon, rushing toward Wu Ming and the last king at an extremely fast speed. Is this also a power? Looking at the huge wave, Razin said calmly. When the huge wave approached the last king discovered that the color of those huge waves was dark red, the color of blood, the color of death. That was the effect of Annihilation's ability on Flood. The power of Annihilation made the huge wave, which could easily crush steel, more violent. It could be said that if Wu Ming put Sun Wukong in this huge wave, the great sage, Heaven's equal, would definitely turn into dust and disappear. Wu Ming suddenly exerted his strength and jumped to the top of the huge wave. Wu Ming was supported by the huge wave and looked at the last king who was waiting for him. Final king, the hero who annihilates the demon king. Come and try to see if you can resist this torrential flood that is mixed with the power to destroy everything. Then the last king narrowed his eyes. That's enough for the thunder of salvation. With that, the last king's divine blade of salvation exploded with a rumble of thunder, rushing towards the monstrous flood created by Wu Ming to destroy everything. Chapter 238. The divine thunder that contained the power of salvation and the flood that destroyed everything were removed. In an instant, as if the Big Bang occurred, a violent explosion occurred at the intersection of the two. After the explosion, the rising wave summoned by Wu Ming disappeared. However, because of the intersection of the giant wave and the divine thunder, a large amount of white mist rose. The white mist covered the sky and the earth, and soon the sun was blocked. The last king's vision was also blocked. The rising white mist also contained the power of destruction, and the last king could not see through everything around him. So that's your plan. The last king couldn't help but smile. The white mist that contained the power of destruction blocked the last king's vision, and then waited for an opportunity to sneak attack the last king. However, your plan is too clumsy. You've exhausted all your tricks. Just wait for me to kill you, king of disobedience. With that said, the last king used the light of salvation from the divine sword of salvation and began to purify the surrounding mist. At this moment, a figure dashed out from behind the last king. Excalibur. Wu Ming shouted the true name of the noble phantasm, compressed the noble phantasm that was supposed to be a light cannon into the holy sword, and slashed at the last king with all his might. However, the last king's light of salvation was instantly activated, and the magical power attached to the holy sword disappeared in an instant, leaving only a sharp and sturdy sword. Boom! Poochie! Wu Ming's holy sword was caught by the last king with his bare hands, and a trace of blood was drawn from the last king's palm. Wu Ming's body was pierced by the last king's divine sword of salvation, and a large amount of golden blood spilled from Wu Ming's body. In this way, you're a general, the last king said without any sadness or joy. However, Wu Ming smiled. Puffed. The last king, do you think you won? Wu Ming looked at the last king with a smile on his face. That's true. After all, regardless of whether you're the god of disobedience or the god slayer, as long as you're not completely killed, you'll definitely retaliate. As he spoke, the divine blade of salvation appeared with streaks of lightning. After all, I'm an existence that won't return until I die. Goodbye, my compatriot. The divine sword of salvation exuded an unprecedented light. There was no doubt that this blow could completely turn Wu Ming into flying ashes. It's time to end it. Wu Ming's voice came from behind the last king. Then, Wu Ming, who had been pierced by the divine blade of salvation, smiled and turned into pure mana before disappearing. The last king was shocked, and he quickly released the divine sword of salvation. But before the last king released the divine sword of salvation, Zabaniya, the last king's heart, was affected by Wu Ming's noble phantasm. Although the last king's heart was not destroyed by Wu Ming's noble phantasm, the last king's eyes suddenly widened, and it was obvious that he was affected. At that moment, his movement came to an abrupt halt. Slayer, Flagalak! A light penetrated the last king's heart, and the last king spat out a mouthful of blood. A black sphere fell to the ground, turned into flying ashes, and disappeared with the wind. Walalala! Countless chains stretched out from the golden ripples, completely binding the dying last king. That's the slash of the war god's sword, Flagalak, the last king said. Wu Ming, who was wearing a black robe, slowly walked up to the last king. The last king, who had been bound by Enkidu, was no longer a threat. Not only was his magic power sealed, but the effect of restraining gods had also caused the last king to fall into a state of paralysis. He could no longer feel his body. Yes, but I got it from a human. Well, a very interesting human. Is that so? Feeling his life force rapidly draining away, and his unconscious body, the last king gave up on struggling. I didn't expect that you have a doppelganger authority that even I can't see through. That's right, the Wu Ming, who was pierced by the last king's divine sword, was Wu Ming's dependent avatar. It was just a doppelganger, but that doppelganger had 100% of the original's combat power. To be on the safe side, Wu Ming also used double pointer on that doppelganger, so as not to let the last king see through the doppelganger. And the result was very successful. Wu Ming's black robe shattered and turned into a card. Then the card shattered and turned into a little bit of magical power. Wu Ming first used Annihilation and Flood to cover up Wu Ming's dependent avatar. However, the last king used Lightning of Salvation to heat the flood containing destructive power into steam. Wu Ming thought that he might as well make use of it, and then use Create Green item to create Assassin Hassan Sabah's rank card, successfully hiding his aura. In fact, Wu Ming originally wanted to use Backlight, sword, to kill the last king directly. After all, Light of Salvation could only seal skills, which Wu Ming saw from the previous battle. Wu Ming used Light Cannon, but the last king didn't use Light of Salvation. When Wu Ming condensed magical power on Holy Sword, the last king used Light of Salvation. The magical power on Wu Ming's sword disappeared. That just proved the limitations of Light of Salvation. After all, if Light of Salvation could seal everything, such as skills, noble phantoms, and magical power, then the last king didn't need to fight Wu Ming at all. He could just seal and kill Wu Ming directly. Did you see the limitations of light of salvation? Ahem. Yes, I can't seal or eliminate the released noble phantoms or skills. Only something similar to enhanced status or magical power can be eliminated by light of salvation. It was precisely because of this that Wu Ming thought of using the backlight sword that he took from Bizet. Yes, took from him. When the last king released Light of Salvation and Lightning of Salvation many times, Backlight Sword was already triggered. After Wu Ming played with it when he had nothing to do. Ahem, he studied it when he had nothing to do. Along with his magician avatar, he successfully maintained Backlight Sword's activation state. Although there was no need to release the Backlight Sword, Wu Ming still had the attitude of helping Buddha to the west. He used the Backlight Sword to completely destroy the heart of the last king that had been damaged by Zabaniya. You lost, the last king, no Rama. Chapter 239. As expected, you've already guessed it. Rama forced a smile. Rama, from the Ramayana, one of the two large-scale epics in India, appeared as the eldest prince of the 10 chariot kings of Ayodhya. He was the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. Among the 3 Indian gods, Brahma was in charge of creation, Shiva was in charge of destruction, and Vishnu was in charge of maintenance. It was the responsibility of Vishnu, the hero, to descend to the mortal world to save the world during the end of mankind. Most importantly, Rama had the experience of killing the demon king. This also meant that he was qualified to be called the hero. When Wu Ming saw the Manchala formation, he guessed that the last king must be a god from Indian mythology. When India was cultivating the secret arts, to prevent the demons from invading, they divided the area into circles and squares called Manchala. As the last king, the ordinary god of disobedience would not be able to take on the role. Therefore, the last king could only be from the 2 Indian epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Coincidentally, the last king had the Manchala formation, which contained the god relics bestowed by the gods and Buddhas in the heavenly realm. In the Ramayana, there was also a legend of Rama obtaining various weapons from the holy immortals. Behind the last king, the one who bore the shadow of madness as a god of disobedience, was probably Rama's younger brother, the 3rd prince of Ayodhya, Rashmana. The bandaged man you summoned must be the white ape Numan who helped you defeat the demon king Rabona. This was also the reason why the bandaged man was covered in bandages and wore a mask on his face. Once people find out that the bandaged man is a white ape, the first thing they would think of would be the divine ape who helped Rama defeat the demon king. In that case, your identity would be exposed. Therefore, the white ape Numan disguised himself with bandages and a mask. He didn't even say a word so that you wouldn't be exposed. Rama, who was tightly bound by the Enkidu, did not say anything. His life was about to end. You're tired of being the last king, aren't you, Rama? Wu Ming suddenly asked. That's right. Whether it was from Rama's tired eyes at the beginning or the way he kept providing information to Wu Ming could tell that Rama hoped that Wu Ming could kill him. This killing was to kill the last king, not Rama himself. Rama knew that Wu Ming was a god from another world. This gave Rama, who had given up on the identity of the last king, a glimmer of hope. That's right. I'm really tired of this life of constant battles. Exhaustion appeared in Rama's eyes as he spoke. Rama would not die completely after being killed. He had the absolute immortality of the strongest steel. The so-called killing of Rama was actually pushing him to the brink of death. After pondering for a moment, Wu Ming spoke to Rama. I don't know if I can free you from the curse of the last king. After all, I don't know anything about curses. After defeating the demon king Luobona and saving Sito, Rama sneak attacked and killed the enemy monkey Pali in order to save his own monkey Pali. Pali's wife cursed Rama because of this. Even if you save your wife, you won't be able to enjoy the joy of reunion with your wife. Being trapped in the identity of the last king and having to fight against the demon king on the surface, Rama would not be able to enjoy the joy of reunion with his lover Sito. However, I'll try my best to do so. After all, I hope that you won't wake up. Hearing this, Rama smiled in relief. I hope you can succeed, my comrade. Also, my former companions, please treat them well. Rama disappeared. Before he disappeared, he left behind a sentence that baffled Wuming. Rama's physical body turned into magic power and disappeared. However, the divine blade of salvation in his hand did not disappear with Rama. Instead, it fell to the ground. Wuming looked at the divine blade of salvation and fell into deep thought. On the other hand, Nuiman, Lancelot, and Guinevere were forced to separate from Zaisha, Sebastian, and Athena due to the flood that was filled with destructive power. Although it seemed like Wuming had taken quite some time to kill Rama, in reality, it only took a few minutes for Rama to be killed. From the time his clone attracted Rama's attention to the time his backlight sword was activated, Wuming had used his assassin relic to delay Rama's movement. One of the two powerful and distinct auras of Wuming and Rama disappeared. Almost everyone around them noticed it. As the fog in the sky dispersed, Nuiman sensed that his companion and master, Rama, had left. He spoke for the first time. Has my lord been defeated? If that's the case, there's no need for me to stay on the surface. As he spoke, the bandages on Nuiman's body were torn apart. The mask on his face cracked, revealing a body of white fur and an ape's face. Subsequently, Nuiman transformed into a gust of wind and disappeared. The white ape Nuiman had returned to the myths. The moment Nuiman returned, a pike that resembled a pipette pierced through the air. Damn it, come back here. Let's fight again. Zaisha waved the pipette in a rather irritable manner. Satya, who had originally wanted to take down Nuiman and make a contribution, realized that she couldn't catch him at all during the fight. Nuiman rode the wind. Regardless of whether it was his speed or explosive power, he wasn't inferior to Zaisha. Although Nuiman couldn't defeat Zaisha, Nuiman's harassment tactics and explosive power were enough to make her feel aggrieved. After all, Zaisha wasn't a patient person. Nearby, Sebastian glanced at the irritable Zaisha and shook his head helplessly. Madam Zaisha, our mission is only to hold them back for Lord Wuming. There's no need to kill them. Of course, I know that. But if I kill the enemy, Lord Wuming might reward me, such as a room at night. With that, Zaisha's face flushed as she fell into a fantasy. Instead of looking at Zaisha, Sebastian looked at Lancelot, who had transformed from the shadow of God into the god of disobedience. Your master has already been defeated by Lord Wuming. Do you still want to continue fighting? Because Sebastian's mission was only to hold Lancelot back. Even Lancelot, who had transformed into the god of disobedience, couldn't take down Sebastian in a short period of time. Lancelot rode his white horse and held his pike. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. I have already made an agreement with my beloved daughter. As long as Lord Villo wins, I will follow my beloved daughter and choose to follow Lord Villo. Wise choice, Sebastian said, then turned around and left. It's time to go, Madam Zaisha, Sebastian called out, releasing Zaisha from her fantasy. On the other side, Guinevere and Athena had stopped fighting. Lord Villo, did Lord Villo win? Guinevere asked excitedly. After all, for Guinevere, who had found his true love, awakening the last king had become an obsession. Therefore, between the last king and Wuming, Guinevere was biased towards Wuming. As expected of someone from my origin of fate, a mere godly ancestor can only be attracted to you. Athena smiled at Guinevere, who was looking at Wuming excitedly. They all came to Wuming's side at almost the same time, but because of their previous relationship, they were divided into three groups. Guinevere and Lancelot stood to the left of Wuming, Zaisha and Sebastian stood to the right of Wuming, and Athena stood in front of Wuming. Athena looked at Wuming, who was holding the divine blade of salvation, and her eyes, which were filled with wisdom, flashed. Athena spoke. People of the origin of fate, are you trying to replace Rama's identity and become the final king? Chapter 240. Athena lived up to her reputation as the goddess of wisdom. She could tell what Wuming was thinking with just a glance. That was right. Wuming was indeed thinking of replacing the last king with the savior sword in his hand. Wuming had tried to destroy the savior sword earlier. Without a doubt, Wuming had failed. Guinevere had told Wuming that the Savior Sword could not be destroyed. Therefore, on a physical level, Wuming could not send Rama back to the mythical level. If it's my real body, I should be able to destroy the Savior Sword that has the indestructible attribute. Wuming mumbled to himself when he could not destroy the Savior Sword. Wuming, whose roots had grown in the Moon world, was close to maturity. He could do things that were out of the norm. That's making a mountain out of a molehill. Therefore, Wuming had the idea of replacing the last king with himself. Rama is in a state of suspended animation with the indestructible attribute of the strongest steel. The Savior Sword and the last king are one. Moreover, it's a combination of the god relics from the heavenly realm. Of course, you can't destroy it, Athena said while shaking her head as if she could read Wuming's mind. Do you know the identity of the last king? Wuming looked at Athena in surprise. Meanwhile, Athena's snake-like eyes moved slightly as a smile appeared on her pretty face. Oh, didn't I tell you that I know the last king's real name? Wuming was helpless. Athena's smile was clearly the smile of a successful prank. Subsequently, Wuming sighed and said, So, do you have a way for me to replace Rama as the last king? Athena put away her mischievous smile and put on a serious face. If it's you, I do have a way. However, you'll have to rely on your lover over there. Athena then pointed at Guinevere, who was standing on Wuming's left. Wuming suddenly understood. I forgot that as the maid of the last king, Guinevere must know the last king very well. Wuming looked at Guinevere, but at this moment, Guinevere seemed rather timid. What's wrong, Guinevere? Wuming asked concernedly when he saw that something was wrong with Guinevere. Looking at Wuming, who treated Guinevere as one of his own, Guinevere asked in confusion. Why? Why can you, Lord Villo? Guinevere was getting agitated. To be able to ignore your hostile behavior and continue to treat you as one of us, right? Wuming spoke the words that Guinevere found hard to say. Guinevere looked at Wuming with tears in his eyes. Lord Wuming. As expected, Lord Villo is still the same Lord Villo. No matter which world you are in, you won't change. Lancelot was wearing thick armor as he stood behind Guinevere and comforted him. Wuming felt that he could be honest about the other world. As for what Rama said about me being a god from another world, he was right. However, when I came to this world, I could be said to have merged with myself. After all, Wuming couldn't say that it was because he came to this world that this world changed because of Wuming and automatically added Wuming's identity into the myths. Wuming then smiled at Guinevere and Lancelot. Although I lost most of my memories due to some reason, I still remember you. Just like Guinevere, she looked exactly the same as the Guinevere Wuming knew in Camelot. The only difference was that one was older and the other was younger. Moreover, the Guinevere in the Moon world was also a magician who knew some magic. Just like the Guinevere in this world, they weren't good at fighting. However, Wuming wasn't sure about the Lancelot in this world. After all, the Lancelot in this world never took off his helmet and thick armor. Wuming didn't know if the Lancelot in this world was similar to the Lancelot in the Moon world. They should be different people. After all, this Lancelot's behavior is completely different from the Lancelot I know. Wuming thought and looked at Lancelot awkwardly. Is there anything else, Lord Villo? Lancelot saw Wuming looking at him and asked. It's nothing. Actually, I just wanted to ask, is the agreement between you and the last king that you will follow me if I kill the last king? Wuming regained his senses and quickly changed the topic to avoid awkwardness. That's right, Lord Villo, or rather, my lord, King Arthur, my beloved daughter, Guinevere, will return to the king's side as Queen Arthur. As for me, I will follow my beloved daughter as the king's Knight of the Lake and return to the king's side. I beg the king to promise. As he spoke, Lancelot knelt on one knee and kowtowed before Wuming. Guinevere also looked at Wuming expectantly. Queen, Lord Wuming's queen, Satya muttered with lingering thoughts as she stared at Guinevere. Guinevere stepped back in fear. Sebastian, on the other hand, did not care. After all, it was not impossible for him to have a few more mistresses. Wuming looked at Guinevere's young body and her cute face that was frightened by Satya. He touched his face awkwardly. After all, kidnapping a lowly was illegal. Yes, it was illegal. Important things had to be said twice. Moreover, Wuming was more concerned about King Arthur's identity. Although the legend of King Arthur in this world was set as Guinevere's creation based on the Villo, Wuming, who knew King Arthur, felt that it was strange. However, he had to accept reality. Get up first, Lancelot. Wuming adjusted his tone and spoke with the spirit of a king. As you wish, my lord. Lancelot stood up and wanted to stand on Wuming's side, but he was stopped by Wuming. Wait a moment. I haven't killed the last king yet. Wuming raised the blade of salvation in his hand. Guinevere. Wuming looked at Guinevere. Your concubine is here. Guinevere bowed slightly and spoke like a lady from a noble family. Wuming sweated when he heard the words, your concubine. However, Wuming subconsciously chose to ignore these details. Can you help me become the last king? Your concubine will do her best. Guinevere looked at Wuming with fighting spirit. It feels like I'm raising a daughter. Then let's begin, Athena. Wuming stabbed the blade of salvation into the ground. Then, Wuming looked at Athena and smiled apologetically. Athena smiled and went to Guinevere's side and said something. Guinevere's face instantly turned red. Chapter 241. Athena left Guinevere's ear, glanced at Wuming, and then smiled at Guinevere. Although Guinevere's face was still red, he still mustered up his courage and walked toward Wuming. Villosa, Guinevere said softly. Yes, what's wrong? Wuming looked at Guinevere curiously. Even a fool would know that Athena must have told Guinevere some abnormal methods to satisfy her own bad taste. I will now send you the information about the Sword of Salvation, Guinevere said as he gently jumped, hugged Wuming's neck, and kissed him. Wuming looked at Guinevere, who had his eyes closed and his face flushed red. He felt the object in his mouth and hugged Guinevere tightly. There was no reason not to take advantage of it. He hugged Guinevere and began to pass the information to him. Sebastian remained calm, and Lancelot was even more so. Satya took out the handkerchief that couldn't be torn no matter how hard she tried. She gripped it with both hands and bit it with her teeth, looking heartbroken. Athena nodded, slightly with satisfaction. Guinevere enjoyed this rare moment of happiness. But at the same time, Guinevere did not forget to directly transmit the information about the Sword of Salvation to Wuming through his lips. Soon, Wuming and Guinevere's head separated. Guinevere's face was flushed. There was a trace of saliva on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of tears. Guinevere was immersed in the intimate contact with Wuming and didn't react. Razin sighed and looked at Athena, who was smiling, and shook his head helplessly. Just when Guinevere inputted the knowledge of Sword of Salvation into Wu Ming's mind, Wu Ming's warrior avatar at 3 o'clock in his heart automatically lit up. That meant he could use the warrior avatar directly. With the power of my words, let the justice of the world appear. Such a spell was powerful and eloquent. It was the sword of wisdom that beckoned victory. Come, the golden sword of the power of words. After that, a golden sword that looked like Excalibur appeared in Wuming's hand. By the way, the Excalibur, which had been transformed by the golden particles, had returned to its original state. It had returned to the appearance of meteor silver. Wuming swung the golden sword and slashed at the Sword of Salvation. The golden sword cut through the Sword of Salvation. However, there wasn't any gap on the divine blade of salvation. What Wuming chopped off was the connection between the divine blade of salvation and Rama, who was faking his death. Now, Wuming, who fully knew the structure of the Sword of Salvation, successfully cut off the invisible connection. Now, you just need to attach your spiritual power to it. As long as you drive Rama out of the Sword of Salvation, you can control the Sword of Salvation. Athena said. In fact, the Sword of Salvation was the symbol of the last king's identity. Whether it was the Manchala Phalanx or the Sword of Salvation, they were the trump cards of the brave against the Demon King. You are both dragon snake and steel. You have the dual nature of dragon snake and steel. You are qualified to inherit the throne of the last king. It just so happens that you, as King Arthur, are also qualified to be a brave. Whether it was the savior of Britain or King Arthur, who was known as the last king because he existed at the end of the gods' era, he was qualified to be a brave. That was why Athena said, "If it's you." Because if there was a god who didn't meet the requirements of the last king, even if he knew the method, he was not qualified, and it would only end in failure. Wu-Ming closed his eyes and began to gather his spiritual power on the sword of salvation. Be careful. After all, Rama is the master of the sword of salvation. In the spiritual world, Rama is likely to launch an attack on you. Be careful, Athena reminded with concern. Launch an attack. As if he thought of something, Wu-Ming smiled and then completely immersed his spiritual power into the sword of salvation. Everyone looked at Wu-Ming nervously. Just a few seconds after Wu-Ming's spiritual power completely immersed into the sword of salvation, the sword of salvation suddenly burst out with illusory light particles. The light particles turned into a human figure, and it was Rama. "Thank you, my compatriot." Rama thanked Wu-Ming, and then the light particles that formed Rama instantly shattered, turned into a little light, and disappeared in the sky. Then, Wu-Ming opened his eyes. "Vilo-sama, how is it?" Guinevere asked with concern. In this regard, Wu-Ming didn't answer. The corner of his mouth curled up, and with a wave of his hand, the sword of salvation that was inserted into the ground flew into Wu-Ming's hand. Wu-Ming held the sword of salvation high, and countless lightning bolts burst out from the sword of salvation, as if they were raging in the sky. There was no doubt that Wu-Ming successfully took over the identity of the last king. Now, Wu-Ming became the strongest steel, the last king, and his real name was Vilo-Thranst. Although I was confident that you could successfully take over the position of the last king, I didn't expect you to be able to drive Rama out of the sword of salvation so quickly, Athena said in a thoughtful tone. Wu-Ming looked at the goddess of wisdom, who was lost in thought, and smiled happily. Then Wu-Ming said, "Rama left the sword of salvation by himself. Leave on his own." Guinevere said thoughtfully. Lancelot didn't say anything. Left by himself? Sebastian and Zacia thought for a while. Left by himself? Athena repeated. Then she instantly understood something. "You mean Rama is tired of being the last king, tired of the life of conquering the demon king on the ground." Athena combined her knowledge of the last king with the various situations in reality. Furthermore, Athena had secretly glanced at the last king from afar. With all these key points, Athena successfully guessed the reason why Rama wanted her to leave. It was because he was tired of her. As expected of the goddess of wisdom, Athena immediately guessed the reason when Wu-Ming reminded her. Looking at Athena's confident face, Wu-Ming nodded. Yes, it's because Rama is tired of being the last king and destroying the demon king on the ground. In Wu-Ming's opinion, a lack of fighting spirit was very fatal for a warrior. Lancelot and Guinevere both lowered their heads slightly. After all, in their opinion, they were the ones who insisted on dragging their former master into a battlefield that he didn't want to enter. Wu-Ming, who saw the nod in their hearts, suddenly said, "Cheer up, my first knight." Lancelot was shocked. That's right, he was no longer Rama's subordinate, but King Arthur's first knight, Lancelot. "And you, my beloved wife, don't let me see your listless side." Wu-Ming gently looked at Guinevere, who was still in Wu-Ming's arms. Guinevere looked at Wu-Ming, who was like the brave and fearless King Arthur on the battlefield, and his face instantly turned from gloomy to happy. "Yes, Sir Vilo." Chapter 242. On this day, the weather was fine, and the world returned to its peaceful state. It had been a week since Wu-Ming became the last king. After Rama was killed by Wu-Ming and turned into the Sword of Salvation, the doomsday phenomenon all over the world stopped, and the temperature of the earth slowly dropped. Within this week, the magic societies all over the world joined forces to magically transform the global environment. After all, if nature were to recover on its own, who knew how many years it would take? It could be a decade, or it could be a few decades. After a week of hard work, the world's environment had returned to its original state. As for the topic of doomsday brought up by ordinary people, the magic societies naturally use hypnosis to cover it up. Anyway, it had nothing to do with Wooming. Now, Wooming was lying on the branch of a big tree, leisurely enjoying the moment of peace. Athena appeared in front of Wooming without him noticing. You sure are relaxed. That's not how a warrior should behave. And this warrior even defeated the last king. Athena frowned, disappointed that Joshua did not live up to her expectations. After the battle of the last king, Athena returned from a girl to a lowly. According to her, it was to satisfy Wooming's inner desires. Wooming was speechless. This is called balancing work and rest. Wooming didn't open his eyes as he said casually. Athena rolled her eyes at Wooming, said a few words, and then left. Your lovers in Europe are here. After a moment of silence, Wooming opened his eyes. Lovers? Wooming shook his head helplessly and smiled. Because Wooming had turned Japan into his territory, Wooming naturally couldn't continue to live in the villa provided by the History Editing Committee. Sayako Mikasa, who had become the leader of the entire Japanese magic world, specially prepared a new residence for Wooming. But Wooming rejected it with the reason that he was used to it. Wooming returned to the villa. As soon as he entered, Wooming felt a sense of hostility. Guinevere and Alice sat opposite each other, smiling as they conversed. Erica and Liliana, Wanli, Guyoli, and Qingxiu Courtyard retreated to the side as they discussed in a low voice. I didn't expect the maid of the last king to betray him. Although I won't comment on certain things, this is indeed a little too much. No one likes a traitor. Don't you think so, Lord Guinevere? Alice maintained her perfect aristocratic smile as she looked at Guinevere. What Alice meant was that as a traitor, Guinevere shouldn't come here to humiliate Wooming. That's not right, Your Highness Alice. Lord Villo is now the last king. I just returned to the king's side. There's no such thing as betraying him. Guinevere maintained his aristocratic smile as he argued with Alice. Guinevere meant that he was loyal to the last king. Wooming was the last king, so there was no such thing as betrayal. Besides, since Lord Villo is the king, it's normal for him to have physical needs outside. Besides, I won't say anything about the king's playmates. However, as the king's wife, I have the obligation to manage those who shamelessly seek pleasure in the king's house despite knowing that the king's wife is still around. After all, one should know their place. Guinevere was referring to Alice, who was just Wooming's playmate. Now that the king's wife was back, she should leave. Aya, Lord Guinevere, you're too much. I don't think anyone would want to separate a married couple who is publicly acknowledged to be in love with each other. Besides, the return of the ex-wife who ran away from home can't shake the position of the king's wife, Alice retorted. What she meant was that the relationship between Alice and Wooming was publicly acknowledged. Besides, Guinevere, who had left Wooming, couldn't shake his position even if he returned. Guinevere and Alice looked at each other with fake smiles on their faces. Anyone could see the strange atmosphere between the two of them. It was why Erica and the others didn't intervene in the matter. Seeing Wooming enter, Wanli, Guyoli, and Walina of the Clear Autumn Garden noticed him first. Lord Villo, both of them bowed slightly to Wooming. As for the reason for such a grand gesture, it would be discussed later. My lord, Liliana also bowed. Erica smiled at Wooming. Wooming shook his head with a bitter smile. Don't do that again. You know me well, so just call me Wooming like before. Guinevere stood up and walked to Wooming's side. My king, you're here. Guinevere looked at Wooming affectionately. Wooming turned his head away awkwardly. You really can't imagine the scene of a lowly looking at you affectionately. Even though it had been a week, Wooming still couldn't get used to Guinevere's gaze. Alice smiled when she saw this. She then stood up and gracefully bowed to Wooming like a princess. Greetings, Lord Wooming. Guinevere looked at her angrily. Looking at such an honest and elegant Alice, Wooming was not used to it. Ahem, why are you here? Has the disaster caused by Rama been eliminated? Wu Ming didn't directly respond to Guinevere and Alice's actions. Instead, he changed the topic. After a week of recovery and the efforts of various magic associations, the entire world has basically recovered. Only this easternmost island can't recover for the time being because of your battle with the last king, Alice explained. Wu Ming smiled awkwardly. Because the damage caused by Wu Ming and the last king was too extensive, Japan hadn't been fully restored until now. However, because of this, some areas were turned into scenic spots by the National History Editing Committee. Their purpose was, of course, to make money. As for you, Wu Ming, after becoming the last king, won't you affect the land? Erica asked. That's right. After inheriting the position of the last king from Rama, Wu Ming, who became the last king, should have Rama's attribute of causing damage to the land. However, maybe it's because my attribute is different from Rama's. After becoming the last king, not only did I not gain the power to deal with the land and the draconic serpents, but I also gained the power to protect the draconic serpents and the land, as well as the power to deal with steel. As he spoke, Wu Ming extended his hand. A light appeared on his hand. Athena, who wasn't there, suddenly appeared in the air. She laid on Wu Ming's body with a flushed face. Athena emitted light. Everyone present could feel that Athena's power had been greatly enhanced. However, Athena seemed to have been drugged with some human society's flirting drug. Wu Ming smiled awkwardly. He then removed the light from his hand, and Athena returned to normal. Following that, it was a round of staring at each other. Chapter 243. Athena looked at Wu Ming, and Wu Ming looked back at Athena. I'm sorry, Athena. Although Wu Ming knew that the effect was strange, he had forgotten about it, because he wanted to show off his power. Yes, that's right. I don't mind mating with you, but I'm afraid your lovers won't agree. Athena's blunt words caused the faces of the innocent girls to turn red. Welina and Liliana from the clear autumn courtyard blushed and did not say anything. Erica giggled, and even Alice blushed. Bo, shameless. You pervert demon king. Wanli Guyoli's face turned red as he shouted at Wu Ming. Why would he agree? Wait, why would Lord Villa want to mate with Lord Athena? What about me? Guinevere said angrily. Wu Ming looked at Athena's giggling face and knew that she was making fun of him again. Fortunately, Wu Ming had put Sebastian and Shadia back into the staff of Ainsworthing. Otherwise, if there was another Shadia, Wu Ming would really go crazy. What's going on? Why are you making so much noise in front of our king? Suddenly, a female voice sounded. It was a young girl. The young girl had the face of an angel and short blonde hair that reached her shoulders. 2 thin braids were placed in front of her chest. Her ample bosom and tall and slender figure matched each other, giving others an exceptional sense of beauty. At this moment, the girl was wearing a gorgeous maid outfit and looked like a capable head maid. Uncle, you're here, Guinevere greeted. That's right, this girl was the Lake Knight in thick armor, Lancelot. Yo, Lord Lancelot. Wu Ming greeted her awkwardly. After all, Wu Ming did not expect Lancelot, whom he thought was a man, to be a beautiful girl. Wu Ming still remembered what Lancelot said when she took off her armor. As the tip of my king's spear, I have the use of crusading enemies for my king. Since my king has no need to go to war for the time being, I will become your personal knight and take care of my king and queen's daily life. Then, Lancelot put on the gorgeous, maid uniform that looked like a princess, leaving Wu Ming dumbfounded at that time. It's too noisy. Keep quiet in front of our king. Like a real head maid, Lancelot lectured everyone, including Guinevere, seriously. Uncle. Guinevere looked at Lancelot pitifully. Now that I'm our king's subordinate god, we have to follow his orders. Even my beloved daughter can't disobey, Lancelot said seriously. All right, let's stop quarreling. Since everyone is here, I have something to tell everyone. Seeing Wu Ming's serious expression, everyone calmed down. Then, Wu Ming and the others came to the meeting room. Wu Ming sat at the head of the table, while Lancelot stood beside him. The other sat on the sofa beside Wuming. Actually, I'm preparing to leave this world. What? Wuming had just finished speaking when the others were shocked. Everyone calmed down. Wuming waved his hand and calmed everyone down. I don't know if you saw it, but when I was fighting with Rama, we used Enuma Elish to shatter space. There's some black matter outside the world. Everyone shook their heads. Lancelot was the only one who nodded. I've seen the dark matter. It's indeed a shocking darkness, Lancelot said seriously. Actually, one of the reasons I came to this world is for the darkness, Wuming said. So, Lord Wuming, do you mean you're going to other worlds to look for the darkness? Alice asked. Yes. I don't know why, but I have a feeling that only I can solve it. Although the feeling was disdainful to ordinary people, for experts like Wuming, the feeling was often right. Wuming, are you here to ask for help? Erica joked. It's just a simple explanation. I'm just worried that you'll cause trouble when I'm not around. Wuming waved his hand. Then you can rest assured. As your knight, I, Erica Brantery, am always ready. Me too, my lord. Liliana Kranikar is always ready. I wish you all the best, Lord Wuming. Wanli Guyuli was looking forward to it. Do your best, Lord King. Grace of the Autumn Courtyard smiled playfully. Don't worry and go. I will help you manage your kingdom. Alice smiled. Ugh. Guinevere was reluctant. Damn it. She's speaking like a matriarch. If that's the case, I shall follow my king into battle, Lancelot said from the side. I would like to follow you, Lord Villo. Guinevere looked at Wuming expectantly. The darkness outside the world? I would like to see how it compares to the darkness of Mother Earth. Athena was implying that she would like to follow Wuming. On the other hand, Erica, Alice, and the others knew that they were not powerful enough, which was why they did not say that they wanted to tag along. After all, the beings here were either the god of steel or the godly ancestor, and Erica and the others were naturally weak as humans. Furthermore, being weak could very well be a burden. Weakness was a sin. However, Wuming shook his head and rejected Lancelot's suggestion. No, even I'm a little afraid of the darkness. Before I investigate it clearly, I won't let anyone go with me. Wuming's attitude was unusually firm. Is that so? Since it's my king's decision, I shouldn't interfere as a subject. But I still hope that you can summon me in time when you need me, Lancelot said. Wuming certainly knew what Lancelot meant. Lancelot, who had formed a connection with Wuming and became his subordinate god, could naturally be summoned by Wuming to help. But Wuming might not be able to summon Lancelot in other worlds. I understand. As you wish, Lancelot. Thank you, my king. Lancelot knelt on one knee and bowed. Don't forget about me. With my wisdom, you should be able to do much better in other worlds. Athena tugged at Wuming's sleeve. Athena was Wuming's first subordinate god. There is no reason why Lancelot could be summoned, but Athena couldn't. I can also help you, my lord Villo, Guinevere said, but he still felt a little guilty. Guinevere was a god ancestor, but he had signed a master-slave contract with Wuming and became a subordinate god. Hence, he could be summoned. For strength, he had Lancelot. For wisdom, he had Athena. Guinevere didn't seem to be of much use. Guinevere was afraid that Wuming would be disappointed in him. But a large hand covered Guinevere's head. I'll try summoning you when the time is right. Don't disappoint me. Looking at Wuming's gentle face, Guinevere felt like he had fallen. Yes, my lord Villo. So, Wuming, when do you plan to leave? Erica asked. I've decided to leave now. Wuming thought for a while and said, looking around at everyone, I wish you success. Everyone said in unison. Yes, even if it's for you, I'll succeed. Wuming smiled happily. Then, the space around him rippled. Then, Wuming disappeared. Then, everyone, go to work for my king, Lancelot said. Then, everyone left the meeting room. A moment later, Angela, who had just woken up, opened the door of the meeting room and came in, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Huh, where's my lord? I can feel his aura. Chapter 244. This time, Wu-Ming didn't enter the space-time tunnel. Instead, he came to the outside of the world. Wu-Ming, who had transformed into the origin dragon, roamed the outside of the universe-like world. A dragon tens of millions of feet long floated here. Looking at the translucent sphere that wasn't as big as his body but was still huge, Wu-Ming sighed. This is probably the world of the Godslayers. Although it was a translucent sphere, he couldn't see anything inside. After all, Wu-Ming was right beside the sphere as soon as he came out. Wu-Ming turned his gaze to the several large spheres not far away, as well as the other spheres in the surroundings and the countless spheres in the distance. Wu-Ming's body told him that these were all worlds. So, where did the black mud go? As Wu-Ming said that, as if in response to Wu-Ming's words, a small group of black mud wriggled over from the other side of the Godslayer world. Wu-Ming looked at the black mud warily. Then, on his huge dragon body, the sacred dragon mouth gathered the rainbow-colored origin fire. After the baptism of the origin moon world, Wu-Ming also awakened an attack-type talent ability. The origin fire could be described in one sentence. Nothing can't burn, nothing can't destroy, and nothing can extinguish. Whoosh! Flames containing a strange power erupted from Wu-Ming's mouth and instantly sprayed on the black mud. Like wine meeting fire, the black mud was burned fiercely by the origin fire. Then, the black mud was incinerated in a moment and turned into pure magic power that could replenish the outside of the world. Wu-Ming looked at the place where the black mud disappeared, looked around, and left. Wu-Ming went to find the source of the black mud. In every world, Wu-Ming was like a guest in someone's home. But in the space-time tunnel and the outside of the world where Wu-Ming was now, it was like returning to his home. After all, the origin dragon was huge after reaching adulthood and could only survive in a place like the outside of the world. Wu-Ming felt great, as though he was invincible. After flying for a few minutes, Wu-Ming came to a stop. Wu-Ming looked at a sphere. Gazing at it, Wu-Ming moved slowly toward it. Then, Wu-Ming summoned the staff of Anziergen from his body, and 2 rays of light entered the sphere. The 2 figures just now were Sebastian and Satya. The world Wu-Ming was currently in was the world of Nazalik. As it was dangerous to descend, Wu-Ming sent Satya and Sebastian, who were still in the staff of Anziergen, back to Nazalik. Of course, Wu-Ming also left a message for them through communication magic. Now, I just need to find the source of the black mud. Then, Wu-Ming flapped his wings again and flew further away. As Wu-Ming moved forward using his senses, the spots of light around him gradually disappeared, and the surroundings became pitch black, just like the black mud. Wu-Ming tensed up. He had a hunch that he might be able to see his hometown this time. Wu-Ming didn't know how long he had been flying. He only knew that he was getting colder and colder. After a while, Wu-Ming stopped. A gorgeous mouth kept rotating, and the surrounding light softly scattered. Wu-Ming was excited. There was no mistake. This was the entrance to Wu-Ming's origin, which was Wu-Ming's hometown. Although he was excited, Wu-Ming knew that he would return to his hometown sooner or later. This was also why Wu-Ming was so obsessed with returning to his hometown in the past. But now, he didn't seem to care. However, there were drops of black mud-like substance constantly flowing out of this mouth. This was a huge scourge, and he had to solve this problem. Wu-Ming's body told Wu-Ming so. Now, Wu-Ming knew why this black mud-like substance had an aura similar to Wu-Ming's origin dragon. Therefore, this black mud came from Wu-Ming's hometown. Wu-Ming fell into deep thought. After much consideration, Wu-Ming decided to enter the origin to investigate. And so, Wu-Ming plunged into the entrance to the origin. The interior of the origin was not as chaotic as the origin of the M-Moon world. Instead, it felt like a dreamy universe. Wu-Ming looked down. Wu-Ming easily found the black stream of substance at the lowest part of the origin. Wu-Ming didn't care about this for the time being. Instead, he continued forward, hoping to reach the center of the origin. Soon, Wu-Ming arrived at the center of the origin. However, Wu-Ming discovered that apart from Wu-Ming's origin dragon, there were also the auras of other origin dragons. The auras of these origin dragons were so dense that Wu-Ming couldn't help but guess what had happened. Then, Wu-ming arrived at the center, laid down steadily, and closed his eyes. Wu-ming began to act like the origin of the Moon world. However, this time, Wu-ming didn't just want to absorb the power here. He also wanted to get an answer. Just like that, Wu-ming's main body fell into a deep slumber. However, Wu-ming didn't notice that when Wu-ming's huge main body fell asleep, some of the black substance around him became restless. The black mud slowly gathered together and wriggled toward Wu-ming's side. A moment later, the black substance reached Wu-ming's side. When it touched him, countless lightning and holy light burst out of Wu-ming's body. Although the black mud couldn't be touched, it turned into dust and disappeared as if it had heard a miserable cry. Then, the lightning and holy light fused into Wu-ming's body and continued to protect him. Because he couldn't get any information for the time being, Wu-ming decided to experience other worlds as a heroic spirit. After all, Wu-ming had the habit of traveling and couldn't stand loneliness. Because the origin of the Moon world was also in this area, and Wu-ming's martyr's palace was rather special, Wu-ming easily transferred his consciousness into his body as a heroic spirit. In Wu-ming's martyr's palace, the white-robed, golden-haired Wu-ming opened his golden eyes. When he saw his current appearance, he came to a realization. This was because other than the identity of French General Sauterlec, Wu-ming only had 3 identities that he had personally experienced. The Connaught Silver Dragon, Sirinth. The British Silver Dragon, Vilo Sirinth. There was also a powerful being of Mesopotamia, the guardian of Uruk, the wise dragon, who did not have a specific name, but only a title. At that time, it was after Wu-ming had experienced the Uruk that he was asked by Gaia Aleia to enter this newly built martyr's palace. I wonder how they're doing. Wu-ming thought of Maeve, who had changed a lot because of him, the immature Artoria, and the tyrannical ancient king, Gilgamesh. They've probably all turned into heroic spirits. After the meeting, Wu-ming decided to take a trip to the world he owed a favor to. I wonder if Aria managed to attack that parallel world. Then, Wu-ming, who was sitting on the gorgeous stone chair, lost consciousness. His consciousness had already arrived on a certain card. Chapter 245. Winterwood City, a mansion located in the residential area. Mayu woke up early, changed into a maid outfit, did some simple cleaning, and began to prepare breakfast. Rin and Osaka also came out from the room next to Mayu's. Strangely, Rin and Osaka was also in a maid outfit. Sister Rin, good morning. Mayu politely greeted. Good morning, Mayu. Rin and Osaka yawned, somewhat listlessly responded. After Livia finished washing up, she came out from the room. Oh, isn't this the maid Rin and Osaka? Oh haha, Livia saw Rin and Osaka and laughed like a queen. Rin and Osaka clenched his fist, resisted the urge to punch Livia's face, and tried to maintain an elegant smile, looking at Mayu. Mayu, let's go prepare breakfast together. Okay, Mayu somewhat helplessly said. Since Rin and Osaka entered Livia's house as a maid, this scene happened almost every morning. Mayu was almost used to it. Oh ha ha ha, oh ha ha. Rin and Osaka and Mayu entered the kitchen in Livia's 3 queen laughs. Soon, breakfast was brought to the table by Rin and Osaka and Mayu. Livia, Rin and Osaka, and Mayu sat together on the chairs and began to enjoy this delicious breakfast. Livia tasted the breakfast, and her face was full of joy. As expected of Mayu, every day you can make a different country's breakfast, and it's so delicious. You're exaggerating, Sister Livia. These are all made by me and Sister Rin. Without Sister Rin, I wouldn't be able to make these. Mayu shook her little head. Mayu is right. I really hope I can raise the salary. Rin and Osaka ate breakfast while gnashing his teeth. However, Livia ignored Rin and Bin's words and continued her conversation with Mayu. Actually, Mayu, you don't have to be a maid. Your brother helped me to collect the cards, so I should be the one thanking you. After Wu-ming left, Mayu was brought to Livia's residence. Because she remembered Wu-ming's words, Mayu chose to become Livia's maid in exchange for the right to live in Livia's residence. Of course, even if Mayu were to become a big missy, Livia would not say anything. However, Livia was even more optimistic about Mayu now. Brother Wuming taught me not to take other people's care for me for granted. Mayu shook her head and retorted. Actually, Livia did not have to specially bring Mayu over to live. After 5 years of Mayu's teachings from Wuming, Mayu could be said to already have the necessary knowledge for a person's life. Because of Wuming's request, and because Mayu is still a child, Livia wanted to let Mayu move over. Well, after all, this is also one of Mayu's strengths. If someone can also realize this, then I'll be much more relaxed. Livia laughed. Ha! The knife and fork in Rin Enbin's hand was broken by Rin Enbin in anger. Then, Livia thought of something and continued. I don't know how your brother is now. He said he would be gone for a few days, but now it has been 3 weeks. Livia complained. That's right. It has been 3 weeks since Wuming left. Because of Wuming's help, from the time Livia and the others came to Japan to the time when they finished collecting the rank cards, it only took them a week to collect all the rank cards. After that, 3 weeks had passed, and Wuming still had not returned. Maybe Brother Wuming encountered some small trouble. Brother Wuming is very strong, so he will definitely be fine, Mayu said with a smile. However, although that was what she said, Mayu's worries still lingered. Well, thinking about it, after all, he is that person. Livia hadn't been idle in the past 3 weeks. Just yesterday, Livia successfully found out Wuming's real name through the Eiderfelt family's intelligence system. Mesopotamia, the most mysterious legendary dragon in Sumer mythology. It has the closest relationship to Tiamat. It has supreme wisdom and thousands of magic tricks, and it taught the most ancient Uruk Hyunryong. What a powerful background, Rin Enbin exclaimed. Then Livia laughed proudly. Just Rin Enbin. If it wasn't for me, he would probably still be in the dark. As expected, victory is mine, Livia Serena Eiderfelt. You bastard, if it wasn't for you, I would still be able to find out Wuming's identity, Rin Enbin said angrily. Brother Wuming is a Uruk Hyunryong. Mayu repeated Livia's words and lowered her head to think. After finishing breakfast and cleaning up the dishes, Mayu said goodbye to Livia. Then, Sister Livia, Sister Rin, I will go find Ilya first. Mayu changed into Suigyun Academy's primary school uniform, carried a handbag in her hand, and bowed to Livia and Rin Enbin. Be careful on the road, Mayu. Livia and Rin Enbin both nodded. However, Mayu began to complain. Sister Livia and Sister Rin should be careful. Don't be like last time because of an argument on the road and ended up fighting. Not only did it lead to a traffic jam, you were late for school, and you were even punished by the gem master to extend your study time. As Mayu said, Livia and Rin Enbin's expression looked like it was the end of the world, unable to get up again. After Wuming left, Livia and Rin Enbin had a dispute because of the class cards. In the end, even a helicopter was involved. Of course, the helicopter belonged to Livia. Rin Enbin did not have the money to send a helicopter. Then, the furious Rin Enbin chased after the helicopter that Livia was on and directly used some means to shoot down the helicopter and took back 7 class cards from the unconscious Livia. In the end, Rin Enbin called the British clock tower on the other side of the world, but was told that because the gem master could not show the spirit of cooperation, Rin Enbin and Livia needed to study abroad for a year, and even the procedures were completed. As Rin Enbin crushed the phone that was hung up, angry and sorrowful cries filled the air. After that, Rin Enbin and Livia became students of Suigyun Academy High School. By the way, because Rin Enbin's funds were depleted, and because he needed to use gems, there was no job that could provide a large amount of funds. As a last resort, Rin Enbin came to Livia's house to be a maid. Then, I'll leave first. Looking at the two who were extremely weak, Mayu felt that it was better to leave first. Standing at the door, Mayu was not in a hurry to find Ilya, but instead took out a card from her pocket. It was an extremely special golden class card, On it was a drawing of a dragon, and other than that, there were no words. Brother wooming. Chapter 246. The card in Mayo's hand was the one that flew out of Shua Yu's residence after Wooming left. That night, the card flew to Mayo's bed in Livia's house. While she was sleeping, Mayu discovered the card. For some reason, Mayu could sense that the card was Wooming's. Hence, Mayu had been carrying the card. Because there was no need to, only Sapphire, who had been following Mayu, knew of the card's existence. Mayu didn't even tell Livia, Rin, Inosaka, or Ilya. This could be considered Mayo's selfishness as a young girl. Putting away the card, Mayu went to Ilya's house across the street. Ever since Wooming left, Mayu often hung out with Ilya. It was not only because the two were friends who had fought together, it was also because Ilya was Mayo's first friend in this world. In short, the two had a very good relationship during this period of time. After greeting Sela and Ligerite, Mayu went upstairs to Ilya's room alone. Knock, knock, Ilya, are you awake? The sound of knocking on the door was followed by Mayu's call. After waiting for a few seconds, Mayu opened Ilya's door. As expected, Ilya was still sleeping. Walking to Ilya's bedside, Mayu shook Ilya and called out softly, Ilya, Ilya, wake up. We're on duty today. As if she heard someone calling her, Ilya opened her eyes in a daze. Did you sleep too much, Ilya? Mayu asked with concern. Ilya's confused eyes looked at Mayu. Then, Ilya smiled. Big brother. Long time no see. As compensation, let's have a morning kiss today. As she spoke, Ilya wrapped her arms around Mayu's neck and pouted her little mouth as she approached Mayu. Sigh. Mayu was a little flustered. She had never encountered such a situation before. For a moment, she did not react and was stunned in place. At this moment, Ilya also realized that the person she was hugging didn't seem to be Wooming, and she woke up. There was a moment of silence. Yo Xiaolon. Ruby flew out of nowhere and said to Mayu's hair. At this moment, Sapphire also flew out of Mayu's hair and greeted her sister. Good morning, sister. Then, Ilya yelled and ran away from Mayu. Mayu, I thought you were Big Brother just now. That's not real. I only dreamt of Big Brother. I don't have any thoughts about Big Brother. Mayu didn't say anything and only shook her head when she saw the flustered Ilya, who was trying to explain herself but ended up babbling nonsense with a flushed face. It's all right. If it's Ilya, I don't mind. Ilya, who was a little confused, froze on the spot. By the way, Ilya and I are on duty today. Ilya, change your clothes first. I'll wait for you outside. With that, Mayu brought Sapphire out of the room and closed the door, leaving Ilya with a lingering look and Ruby with an infatuated blush. Shortly after, Ilya quickly put on her clothes and had breakfast. Then, she went to school with Mayu. At this moment, a limousine appeared beside Ilya and Mayu. The car window rolled down and Livia and Rin Enbin's heads popped out. Mayu, Ilya, I have something to ask of you after school. Remember not to leave. I'll pick you up. With that, the limousine left without waiting for Mayu and Ilya to speak. Mayu and Ilya vaguely heard something like, we're going to be late again. It's all your fault. I really don't know when Sister Rin and Sister Livia will be able to understand how to work together. Ilya sighed. Aya, I don't think the two of them can be together. Ruby ridiculed. Mayu fell in a deep thought. Seeing Mayu like this, Ilya asked curiously, What's wrong, Mayu? Mayu reacted and shook her head. It's nothing. I'm just thinking about Brother Wooming. Speaking of this, Ilya instantly recalled the morning kiss incident in the morning. Her face turned red. Mayu, let's hurry up and leave. Otherwise, we'll be late. With that, Ilya pulled Mayu and started running. Aya, it's good to be young. Ruby ridiculed. Sister, saying this will only make you sound old. Lil Lon, I'm still young. In the afternoon, after school, Ilya and Mayu said goodbye to their friends and waited at the school gate. Phew, I wonder how Big Brother is doing now. Perhaps because she dreamed about Wooming in the morning, Ilya suddenly said, If it's Brother Wooming, He'll definitely be able to solve everything, Mayu said with some longing. That's right, that's right. After all, Big Brother is very strong, handsome, gentle, and reliable, Ilya said happily. Ilya, do you like brother woman? Mayu looked at Ilya and suddenly asked, like something? How is that possible? Mayu, you really like to joke. Ah, Ilya laughed awkwardly. Mayu looked at Ilya and didn't say anything. Ilya also lowered her head like a little girl whose secret was discovered by her good friend. Although she was just a little girl, she was just a little girl. At this moment, the limousine stopped beside Ilya and Mayu. The door opened, and a pair of hands pulled Ilya and Mayu into the limousine. Ilya, Mayu, I'm sorry for dragging you here. I'll have to trouble you now, Rin Inbin said apologetically. After that, Rin Inbin and Luvia told Ilya and Mayu about what happened. Because the clock tower called and said that the ley lines hadn't recovered yet, they didn't reject the possibility of blockages or even cards of other classes. That was why they needed Rin Inbin and the others to use the ruby and sapphire magic attire that was supplied with magic from a parallel world to inject magic power into the ley lines. In short, it's because the ley lines haven't recovered yet, so they need to inject magic power manually, right? Mayu asked. As expected of Mayu. You summed it up in one sentence, Livia praised. It's great that there's no battle. Ilya had a dispirited expression. As expected, even if she went through special training and her strength increased significantly, with Ilya's personality, she still had a headache about battle. Soon, the limousine arrived at a mountain, Yuanzhong Mountain. After getting out of the limousine, the group advanced into the mountain. Soon, Ilya and Mayu, who had transformed into magical girls, followed Rin Inbin and Luvia to a large cavern. There's such a large cavern here. I didn't even know about it. Ilya looked at this place with interest. As someone who had lived in this city for as long as she could remember, Ilya was shocked. After all, there's a barrier here. Normal people wouldn't know about this place, Rin Inbin said. Ilya couldn't help but recall Rin Inbin and Luvia, who had fallen into the bottomless swamps trap. Then it's here. Rin Inbin walked to an empty space and stopped. Luvia and Rin Inbin placed a series of gems on the ground. Then, Rin Inbin took out the earthen gift needle from his back. This was a magic tool used to inject magic power into the ley lines. He inserted the earthen gift needle into the center of the magic array. Instantly, the earthen gift needle that looked like a withered branch started to grow like a tree. Ilya, Mayu, Rin Inbin and Luvia shouted. Ilya and Mayu looked at each other and nodded. Then, with the earthen gift needle as the center, they each raised a ruby and sapphire in their hands and began to inject magic power into it. And when the four worked together to inject magic power, the card on Mayu's body shone with golden light and swayed. In just a few seconds, the magic power infusion was complete. And at this moment, an earthquake occurred. Chapter 247. Not good. This is the magic backlash of the ley line. The magic power comparable to a magnitude of 10 earthquake began. The few people in the Yuzhong Mountains hole were affected by the magic backlash of the ley line. The ground shattered, and rocks fell from the open space. In an instant, Rin, Inbin, and Luvia were lifted up by a huge rock. Sister Rin, Sister Luvia, Ilya shouted. At this time, Mayu, who was standing next to Ilya, moved. I'll go save them. Ilya, keep an escape route. Then, Mayu quickly jumped in the air, instantly arrived next to Rin, Inbin, and Luvia, and hugged them. At this time, several huge rocks fell, facing Mayu and the others. Rumble! The big hole collapsed, making a huge noise. Outside the big hole, a golden light flew out from the collapsed big hole. Ilya, Mayu, Rin Inbin, and Luvia fell to the ground. So rude, throwing a lady on the ground. Luvia covered her butt and said with a frown, It hurts, what's going on? Rin Inbin complained. Brother wooming? Big brother. Mayu and Ilya shouted in surprise. A blond man wearing a white robe stood in front of Ilya and the others. It was Caster Wooming. Then, Mayu threw herself into Wooming's arms. "Sorry, Mayu, I came back late." Wooming hugged Mayu and said apologetically. Mayu didn't say anything. She just silently shook her head. Then, Wooming looked at Ilya, who wanted to throw herself at him. "Are you afraid of me, or what?" Wooming said with a smile. "Big brother." Hearing this, Ilya's eyes lit up, and she also threw herself into Wooming's arms. "So, it's you, that magic backlash just now is also your doing?" Rin Inbin narrowed his eyes and looked at Wooming. Wooming smiled helplessly. "I did trigger a large amount of mana when I returned, but it wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the blockage in the veins." Wooming was right. As long as there were no blockages in the earth vein, even if more mana was injected, the level of mana backlash would not occur. "You're right." Rin In Osaka turned his head away. "Out of sight, out of mind." "Speaking of which, Wooming, why did you suddenly appear in the big hole?" Livia asked a question that had some substance to it. Wooming looked at Mayu with interest. Mayu lowered her head in shame. Wooming smiled and patted Mayu's head. "Before I left this world, I left a mark on Mayu. As long as I return, I will definitely be by Mayu's side." Mayu raised her head and looked at Wooming in surprise. Wooming could only smile. "Oh, I see," Livia said. "But I always felt that you were a perverted Siscon. Placing a mark on your sister's body is unexpectedly disgusting." Rin Inbin narrowed his eyes at Wooming. Wooming didn't mind at all. After all, it was just a joke. After all, Rin Inbin and the others were already familiar with Wooming's personality. They weren't the kind of people who would flatter big shots, which was why they were able to act this way. "That, I've been wanting to ask since just now. Big brother, who's behind you?" Ilya raised her hand and pointed at the figure sitting on the ground behind Wooming like a primary school student asking a question. At this time, everyone realized that there was indeed a person sitting behind Wooming. However, because Wooming returned and Wooming's body was blocking them, no one noticed it. Sensing that he had been called, the figure turned around and looked at the crowd with a confused expression. Eh, eh. Everyone shouted in surprise. Especially Ilya's voice was the loudest, because the figure sitting beside Wooming was exactly the same as Ilya. Except for her dark skin and different clothes, she was simply Ilya herself. As if she had reacted, Black Ilya looked at Wooming with a different kind of emotion, then got up and quickly fled before anyone could react. Wooming looked at the figure with some worry, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Showayu Mansion. The house that hadn't been lived in for 3 weeks was clean. Although Mayu had moved to Livia's house, whenever she was free, Mayu would always come back to clean up so that Wooming could see a clean house when he came back. And Ilya, Rin Inbin, and Livia would also accompany Mayu to clean here. After coming to the living room and preparing tea, Wooming and the others sat on the still clean cushions. "Thank you for your hard work, Mayu," Wooming said while patting Mayu's head. Wooming could naturally see that someone cleaned the Showayu mansion almost every few days, and it was a comprehensive cleaning. "Thank you all for your hard work. Thank you for taking care of my sister. This is a token of gratitude from a brother." Wooming bowed to the group. The few who originally wanted to decline didn't say anything. Since Wooming thanked them as a big brother, it would be rude not to accept it. Hey, I've been taken care of by Mayu a lot." Ilya touched her face shyly. Being able to become friends with Mayu and learning and growing with Mayu is the one I want to thank the most, Wooming said to Ilya with a smile. Wooming had always believed that only people of the same generation could progress together. As an elder, Wooming could give Mayu a lot, but he couldn't give Mayu friendship. In addition, Wooming and Sapphire recognized Ilya and Mayu as their masters, which was why Wooming wanted to make Mayu and Ilya friends. Magical girls were one. This sentence wasn't a joke. It's not as serious as Big Brother makes it out to be. Although Mayu is a little shy in school, she still works hard to communicate with other students. I think Mayu is already working very hard. After hearing this, Wooming heaved a sigh of relief. After all, although Mayu went to school in the previous parallel world, she didn't make many friends because of her personality. Mayu's classmates basically only knew Mayu and didn't interact much with Mayu. This was also why Mayu was so happy to meet Erica Ainsworth, who wanted to be her friend. Then, let's discuss the problem of the other Ilya. Rin Inbin put on a pair of glasses that he dug out from somewhere. Yes, that's right, that's right. Why is there another me? At the mention of the other Ilya appeared serious. It couldn't be helped. No matter who it was, they would be like this when they had another person who looked exactly like them. Then, let me explain, Wu Ming said seriously. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.